Beneath the surface of our recorded history lies something stranger than fiction. Stories not lost to time by accident, but seemingly swallowed by something deeper. Entire civilizations that left behind no farewell. Artifacts that defy explanation. Technologies that shouldn't exist. Names once spoken by millions, now erased without a trace. We're told history is a chain of facts, a steady march of progress. But scattered across ancient ruins, forbidden manuscripts, and unexplained gaps in the record are silent rebellions against that story. Why did an empire vanish overnight, leaving no record of its fall? How did a map chart lands no one should have known? Who carved impossible symbols into stone before writing was ever invented? These aren't legends or bedtime myths. They are real mysteries, buried in the margins of history books, waiting to be noticed. Tonight, we open the door to what has been forgotten, on purpose or by chance. No conspiracies, no fantasy, just the haunting puzzle of what humanity once knew, and then somehow lost. So sit back, relax, and let your thoughts drift into the shadows of the past. This is Strangely Lost History. The mists cling low over the rolling hills of southern England, veiling the landscape in a soft, silvery hush. Ancient trees, their roots twisted deep into soil once soaked with blood, rise like sentinels from the earth. Scattered across the countryside are the ruins of forgotten strongholds, crumbling stone towers, collapsed keeps, and moats long dried to silence. They whisper of a time when the land was not united, but torn, when law faltered and chaos ruled. It was called the Anarchy, a period so fractured, so lawless, that the name itself became shorthand for collapse. The year was 1135. King Henry I, last son of William the Conqueror, had died without a legitimate male heir. His only legitimate child, Matilda, daughter of a king, widow of an emperor, had been named his successor. But her claim, though backed by blood and oath, was fragile. She was a woman in a world that feared women on thrones, and fear, in the wrong hands, becomes a weapon. Seizing the moment, Henry's nephew, Stephen of Blois, crossed the channel in secret. He was swift, persuasive, and ambitious. Within days, he was crowned king. The barons, some loyal to their oaths, others eager for power, split their allegiances. And thus began nearly 2 decades of civil war, an era so violent, so disjointed, that chroniclers struggled to define it. Some simply called it a time when Christ and his saints slept. It was not one war, but many, not one rebellion, but countless. Alliances shifted like tides. Castles were built, besieged, lost, then built again. Entire towns were razed, families extinguished, crops burned to blackened stubble. In the eyes of the peasants, there were no kings, only wolves with crowns. There were years when no harvest came, when famine and disease rode behind every army. To live in England during the anarchy was to live under the rule of unpredictability. Yet curiously, for a conflict so widespread, so devastating, the anarchy left surprisingly few lasting scars on the official record. There were no decisive legendary battles, no final treaties etched into stone, no dramatic assassinations echoing through literature. Instead, the war faded, slowly, quietly, like a storm that exhausted itself. In 1153, Stephen agreed to name Matilda's son, Henry, the future Henry II, as his heir. Within a year, Stephen was dead. The crown passed to the young Angevin prince, and history moved on. But what exactly had passed? The anarchy is often treated as a footnote in English history, a messy, unfortunate interlude between kings. Yet some scholars and amateur historians alike have long wondered if its obscurity is part of the mystery. How does a war that lasted 18 years, engulfed nearly every noble family in England, and upended the social order, disappear so easily from collective memory? One theory suggests it was a deliberate erasure, that when Henry II took the throne, he launched a quiet but effective campaign to restore order, not just in governance, but in narrative. Documents lost, rewritten, or simply ignored. Chroniclers encouraged to remember triumphs, not failures. The anarchy, too complex and shameful, was allowed to fade. Others point to the curious lack of archaeological evidence. While battles were recorded near Oxford, Lincoln, and Bristol, large-scale remains are rare. Unlike the Norman Conquest or the Wars of the Roses, the scars of the anarchy remain strangely elusive. Were the battles smaller than described, or have their traces simply vanished beneath centuries of soil and silence? There are stranger questions still. Local folklore from Wiltshire to Northumbria tells of abandoned villages that were never resettled. Places where people disappeared, not killed in battle, but gone without explanation. Some blame raiders, others whisper of plague. A few speak of darker things, rituals, curses, old gods awakened in desperate times. While these tales cannot be verified, their persistence suggests a deeper cultural wound, one not accounted for in royal records. Then there are the structures. Earthworks, mound formations, and unnatural ridges found in regions supposedly untouched by the conflict. Some researchers believe these were temporary fortifications or siege sites lost to time. Others argue they predate the war entirely, ancient sites reactivated during the chaos for unknown purposes. Even the castles tell curious stories. In the heart of Berkshire lies a ruined keep, long believed to be a Norman stronghold. But beneath it, ground-penetrating scans have revealed an older foundation, stone arranged in concentric circles, unlike any Norman design. Was this simply reused Roman stone? Or had something else stood there before? And why was a new fortress built directly atop it during the height of the anarchy? There is no shortage of speculation that the war allowed ancient power structures to resurface, that forgotten knowledge, spiritual, architectural, perhaps even technological, was temporarily rediscovered in the desperation of civil collapse, that something buried beneath England's green fields was disturbed during the bloodshed, and then quietly hidden again when peace returned. No solid evidence confirms these theories, yet the lack of answers itself invites inquiry. Why did Matilda, rightful heir and proven leader, never fully claim the throne? Why did Stephen's rule, so chaotic, so often defeated, end not with violence, but with surrender? Why did chroniclers, who described everything from plagues to comets, fall unusually silent during key years of the conflict? And most haunting of all, what did the people living through it believe was happening? Was this merely a fight for a crown? Or did it feel like something greater was being lost? A stability, a truth, perhaps even a memory of what England was meant to be. The anarchy remains a wound without a scar, a chapter with pages missing, a war that drifted away like mist at dawn, leaving behind more questions than answers. So what really happened between 1135 and 1153? And what, if anything, still waits to be uncovered beneath the fields, the ruins, and the silence? Following the chaos of the anarchy, we move into another moment of silence and shadow. A single event, buried in local memory, yet shrouded in a death toll so sudden, so vast, it defies easy explanation. Beneath the quiet cobblestones of Oxford, where scholars now walk between ancient libraries and ivy-clad colleges, there is a deeper history, one that most visitors never hear about. A history not bound to books or ideas, but to something darker, something whispered about in corners of old manuscripts, and occasionally in hushed voices among the locals. It happened in the summer of 1577. Oxford, even then, was a city of contrast, of knowledge and punishment, of enlightenment and judgment. The university rose proudly, with its halls and chapels filled with debate and discovery. But across the city, at Oxford Castle, another kind of truth was unfolding. Cold stone walls, iron-barred cells, and a courtroom that had witnessed countless sentences of death. Justice, in its harshest form, was routinely handed down there, swift, severe, and final. It was in this setting that a routine assize was held, a session of court, as was common in the era, where judges traveled from town to deliver the law. The courtroom was full. Prisoners, guards, officials, jurors, townsfolk. As many as 500 people may have been present across the proceedings. And then, without warning, death began to spread. Not with the chaos of violence, but with the slow, suffocating creep of illness. One by one, those who had been inside the courtroom began to fall sick. Within days, scores were dead. Within weeks, the number had risen sharply. Some estimates claim over 300 people died as a result of attending the assize, including the presiding judge, Sir Robert Bell. There was no fire, no act of war, no visible culprit, just a wave of death that rolled out from the courtroom and into the heart of the city. Contemporary reports were quick to offer explanations. Many believed it was plague. Others pointed to a fever of some kind. The 16th century, after all, was no stranger to sudden outbreaks. England had seen waves of the Black Death, the sweating sickness, and more localized epidemics. Yet the specifics of the Black Assize were odd, even by the standards of the time. The deaths were confined almost entirely to those who had been present in the courtroom. Those outside, the townsfolk who carried on their lives beyond the castle walls, were largely unaffected. There were no rats, no reports of mass illness in surrounding communities. It was as if the courtroom itself had been cursed, poisoned, or somehow infected with something far more targeted. Even more puzzling, the deaths occurred in waves. Some died within days, others lingered for weeks, and a few, officials known to have been present, simply vanished from the record entirely. Some early chroniclers began to suggest other causes. One theory that emerged in the years that followed was of a miasma, a foul air that had built up in the bowels of the castle, perhaps stirred by the summer heat and the press of bodies. Others suspected something had been brought in by the prisoners themselves, an illness they carried, unknown to all. But Oxford is no ordinary place. For centuries, it has been layered not only with scholarship, but with secrecy. From the alchemical experiments of the Middle Ages to the esoteric societies of later years, the city has long straddled the line between the rational and the arcane. It was only a matter of time before the Black Assize drew the attention of more speculative minds. Some suggested a curse, an ancient act of vengeance spoken aloud by a prisoner as judgment was passed. A few stories speak of a man, possibly condemned unfairly, who stood before the court and issued a final, furious declaration that all who had condemned him would not leave the room alive. A theatrical tale, perhaps, but one that persisted. Other theories, stranger still, proposed that the courtroom had been built over something older, something sacred or profane. That the act of holding court in such a place had triggered a consequence, a reckoning. A few fringe researchers, centuries later, pointed to geomagnetic anomalies beneath Oxford Castle, claiming disturbances in the Earth's magnetic field could have caused hallucinations, sickness, even death. And then there is the silence. After the event, there was no official inquiry, no wide-reaching investigation, no medical autopsies, as we would expect today. The deaths were quietly attributed to jail fever, a catch-all term for prison-borne illnesses. The records were sparse. The city moved on. But in Oxford, the past is never far beneath the surface. In 1996, during renovations near the castle, workers uncovered skeletal remains that may have dated to the period. Some believe they belong to the victims of the Black Assize. Others are not so sure. The bones were removed, catalogued, and stored. No definitive answers followed. Even today, some locals speak of strange sensations near the old castle site, of sudden chills, heavy air, inexplicable dread. These stories, anecdotal and often dismissed, mirror similar reports from other historical plague sites. But in Oxford, where the line between mind and matter has always blurred, they feel more personal. What truly caused the Black Assize? Was it a freak convergence of illness and architecture? A tragic case of contagion misunderstood by early medicine? Or was something else unleashed in that room? Something we no longer have the words to explain? And if we were to return to that day in 1577, to stand in the courtroom as judgment echoed from stone walls, what would we feel in the air? Whatever happened there, it left a mark not just on Oxford's history, but on its atmosphere, intangible, unsettling, and unresolved. What are we to make of a courtroom where hundreds died silently, inexplicably, within days? And why, centuries later, does the air around Oxford Castle still seem to hum with something unseen? History doesn't always leave answers. Sometimes it leaves only shadows, and from one shadow we step into another. This one cast not over a single city, but across all of Europe. A pilgrimage with no maps, a crusade with no army. Somewhere in the hills of northern France, the light breaks over quiet fields and stone chapels that have stood for centuries. There are villages here older than many nations, their histories carved into the weathered lintels of crumbling churches, their legends passed down in firelit whispers. But one story haunts these lands more than most, a story of hundreds, perhaps thousands of children who once walked these roads with songs on their lips and crosses stitched into their clothes. A story that begins with faith and ends in silence. The year was 1212. Europe was restless. The official crusades, military campaigns waged by kings and knights to reclaim the Holy Land, had lost their glory. Jerusalem remained elusive. Blood had been spilled on every side, and yet peace was no closer. Into this climate of failure and frustration came a new movement, one not born in courts or castles, but in the mouths of children. According to several chronicles, a boy named Stephen, a shepherd from the town of Cloyes, claimed to have received a divine message. Christ himself, Stephen said, had appeared to him, commanding him to lead a new crusade, not of warriors, but of innocents. Children, he said, were pure. Their faith, untainted by politics and greed, would succeed where kings had failed. The idea caught fire. Stephen began preaching in town squares. He performed what were described as miracles, small ones, subtle, but enough to draw crowds. And from those crowds, children came forward, by the dozens, then hundreds. Some estimates claim as many as 30,000 children joined him, though modern scholars suggest the number was likely far smaller. Still, the movement was real. The procession began. They marched south. Accounts tell of a line of children winding through towns and countryside, barefoot or in sandals, clutching wooden crosses, singing hymns. Many were no more than 12 or 13. Some were as young as 7. Not all were boys, and not all were children. Some adults, perhaps the poor or devout, joined out of hope or desperation. But the heart of the movement remained unchanged. It was the children who led. Their goal was to reach the Mediterranean Sea. There, according to the legend, God would part the waters, just as he had for Moses. They would walk across dry land to the Holy Land. they would reclaim Jerusalem, not with swords, but with prayer. But the sea did not part. When the children reached Marseille, hungry, exhausted, and disillusioned, they faced a world indifferent to their faith. Some turned back, some disappeared, and some, according to the darkest version of the tale, were sold into slavery. 2 merchants are said to have offered them passage across the sea. 7 ships were filled with children. None ever reached the Holy Land. 2 were lost to a storm. The rest, it is said, sailed to North Africa, where the passengers were sold in markets. No names, no records, just a story passed down in grief. That is the legend. But how much of it is true? Historians continue to debate the reality of the Children's Crusade. Some argue that it was not truly a crusade of children, but a movement of the poor, the landless, and the desperate. Others believe the story was later romanticized, exaggerated by chroniclers looking to moralize or warn. Yet, fragments remain. Records in Cologne, in France, in Genoa, all hint at groups of children traveling toward the sea. Some were stopped by bishops, others vanished from the record entirely. In one case, a document from the monastery of Saint-Denis references the arrival of a multitude of children who marched with divine fervor, but who knew not the path they walked. What drove them? Was it faith? Was it the echo of sermons and stories told too often? Was it hope or manipulation? More speculative voices have asked stranger questions. Why do similar stories emerge in Germany at the same time, where another boy named Nicholas reportedly led thousands across the Alps toward Italy? Why do some accounts mention visions, bright lights, voices in dreams, celestial signs in the sky? Could these experiences, described by children in an age of religious ecstasy and fear, point to some psychological phenomenon, or something else? And why do so many names vanish? In an era of chroniclers and scribes, where even minor skirmishes were recorded in detail, how could a movement involving thousands of people leave behind so little? Even the location of their departure, Marseille, is contested. Some versions place it further east. Others suggest they never even reached the coast. The entire narrative shifts depending on the source, like a story told too many times in too many voices. And yet, it lingers. In paintings, in stained glass, in folktales, the image remains. A long line of children marching toward an unseen promise, their faces raised to the sky, their songs carried by the wind. What did they believe they were doing? Were they guided by faith or by something else entirely? Did they truly expect the sea to part beneath their feet? And if it hadn't, what did they see when they stood on the shore, looking out over the waves? Perhaps the Children's Crusade is not a question of fact, but of memory. A collective longing for purity in a time of cruelty, or a warning of what happens when innocence is given no protection. We may never know how many walked, or how many never came back. But their footsteps, faint as they are, still echo across the old roads of France, leading into a mystery that has never truly ended. What drives children to cross continents with no map, no weapons, and no chance of return? Was it faith, or something deeper, more unknowable? History doesn't always whisper its secrets. Sometimes it sings, and sometimes it dances. The streets of Strasbourg were narrow then, paved in uneven stones, and hemmed in by tall timber-framed houses leaning slightly inward, as if to whisper secrets across the alleyways. It was July of 1518. The air was thick, swollen with summer heat and the heaviness of recent famine. The Rhine flowed sluggishly nearby, and from the cathedral, the bells rang out over a population already weighed down by hunger, disease, and fear. And then, on an ordinary morning, without fanfare or warning, a woman stepped into the street and began to dance. She moved alone at first. Her name, according to the few surviving accounts, was Frau Trophea. There was no music, no festival, no reason. She simply began to sway and twirl, her arms lifted as if guided by something unseen. Her feet beat against the cobbles with a rhythm only she could hear. At first, people laughed. Then, they stared. And then, they watched in growing unease as hours passed, and she did not stop. By the second day, others had joined her. By the end of the week, more than 30 people were dancing uncontrollably in the streets of Strasbourg. They danced through the day and into the night. They collapsed from exhaustion, only to rise again and continue. Some screamed in agony, their faces contorted, their bodies moving as if dragged by invisible strings. Witnesses described eyes wide with fear, hands grasping at the air, legs bruised and bleeding. Still, they danced. By August, the number had grown to the hundreds. Authorities were alarmed, but not panicked, at least not yet. In the early 16th century, strange behavior was often interpreted through the lens of religion, astrology, or imbalance of bodily humors. The city council consulted physicians who declared the affliction was due to overheated blood, a hot condition that, paradoxically, required more dancing to cure. So, they built a stage. Musicians were hired. A space was cleared in the marketplace. It was believed that if the dancers could sweat the sickness out, they might recover. But the plan backfired. The music only fed the frenzy. People danced harder, longer, more violently. Some reports claim dozens died, of heart attacks, strokes, or sheer exhaustion. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. By early September, the dancing slowed. The afflicted dispersed. The music fell silent. No one was punished. No one was blamed. The records simply stop, like a door closing on a room you're not meant to enter again. What happened in Strasbourg that summer? Historians have offered explanations, some plausible, some speculative. One theory points to mass psychogenic illness, a form of collective hysteria brought on by stress, fear, and desperation. Strasbourg had recently endured a series of catastrophes, failed harvests, rising prices, disease outbreaks. In such a climate, perhaps a single person's breakdown could have spread like a spark in dry grass. Others point to ergot poisoning, a hallucinogenic mold that grows on damp rye and can cause convulsions, delirium, and a sensation of burning limbs. It's the same fungus from which LSD is derived. The idea that a tainted grain supply could trigger widespread mania is not far-fetched. And yet, ergotism typically causes sufferers to thrash in pain, not to dance in unison. And it rarely lasts for weeks. Still, others have explored the cultural backdrop. The Middle Ages and early Renaissance were rife with mystical traditions and religious ecstasies. Stories of saints, martyrs, and holy visions often involved frenzied movement, trances, or divine possession. Could the dancers have believed, consciously or not, that their suffering was a form of atonement? That through pain, they were purging sin? There's also the figure of Saint Vitus, the patron saint of dance and nervous disorders. In parts of Europe, believers would pray to him for protection against a condition known as Saint Anthony's fire. Vitus's dance, a real neurological disorder that causes involuntary movement. Some believe the Strasbourg outbreak was a kind of mass devotion, a ritual gone out of control. More speculative voices whisper of ancient rituals resurfacing, of old seasonal rites, half remembered and suppressed, breaking through during a time of social fracture. Was the dancing plague a glitch in cultural memory, a buried tradition trying to return? A few go further still. They point to the curious synchrony of the event, not random, not chaotic, but strangely patterned. Hundreds moving together, night and day, as if entranced by a single rhythm no one else could hear. Could it have been a form of trance state, induced by something now lost to us? Music, vibration, even environmental frequencies? There is no consensus, no definitive answer. The dancing plague faded from the official records, as most unsettling events do. It became a curiosity, a footnote, but it was not the only one. Similar outbreaks occurred in other parts of Europe, though none matched the scale of Strasbourg. And in every case, they left the same questions behind. Why did they dance? What compelled their bodies to move until collapse? Was it madness or meaning? Centuries later, the stones of Strasbourg remain, some of them unchanged. The cathedral still towers over the city, casting its long shadow across streets that once echoed with the sound of feet pounding against the earth. Sometimes, history is remembered in monuments, and sometimes in mysteries. Some say that memory lingers in place, that the walls remember. If that's true, what do the stones of Strasbourg still carry? Perhaps there was something in the air that summer of 1518. Or perhaps, for a brief moment, something rose up from beneath the surface of the world and danced. What could drive hundreds of people to dance themselves to death while others simply watched? What force moved them? Fever, fear, or something deeper still? As the strange silence returned to Strasbourg, history turned its gaze elsewhere, eastward, across windswept steppes and ancient trade routes toward a forgotten empire whose very identity remains shrouded in uncertainty. A kingdom that rose, flourished, and disappeared, leaving behind not ruins, but questions. In the vast grasslands between the Black Sea and the Caspian, where the rivers Volga and Don snake through plains of rustling grass and starlit silence, there once stood a kingdom unlike any other. The land today is scattered with fragments, bits of pottery, worn coins, weathered hill forts, bare traces of what was once one of the most powerful and enigmatic empires in the medieval world, the Khazars. They do not appear in most schoolbooks. Their cities are not tourist destinations. Their memory flickers only in the margins of ancient chronicles and the whispered footnotes of diplomatic records. And yet, for over 300 years, the Khazar Empire dominated one of the most strategically important crossroads of the world, bridging the Christian West, the Islamic South, and the pagan and nomadic North. They controlled key segments of the Silk Road. They taxed caravans, forged alliances, and wielded considerable military and economic power. They fought wars against the Arab Caliphate, held diplomatic relations with the Byzantine Empire, and maintained a powerful standing army. But who were they? The Khazars were a semi-nomadic Turkic people, likely originating from the steppes of Central Asia. By the 7th century, they had established a powerful state stretching across modern-day southern Russia, western Kazakhstan, eastern Ukraine, and parts of the Caucasus. Their capital, Itil, was situated near the mouth of the Volga River, a multi-ethnic hub of trade, language, and religion. And it is here that the mystery deepens. At some point during their imperial height, possibly in the 8th or 9th century, the Khazar elite are said to have adopted Judaism as the official state religion. It is a claim that appears in several independent sources, Islamic geographers, Christian chroniclers, and a famous exchange of letters between the Khazar king and a Spanish Jewish scholar named Hasdai ibn Shaprut. But the details are elusive. Why did a Central Asian steppe empire convert to Judaism, alone among the world's great powers? Was it a genuine spiritual awakening or a political maneuver designed to maintain neutrality between the rising Christian and Islamic empires? Did the entire population convert, or only the ruling class? And why is there so little archaeological or textual evidence to confirm the nature or extent of this conversion? Some historians argue that the Khazars adopted Judaism to assert independence, positioning themselves as a third way between the competing monotheisms surrounding them. Others suggest it was a syncretic blend of faiths, more cultural than theological. Some even question whether the conversion happened at all, or if it was exaggerated by foreign observers struggling to make sense of a powerful people who defied familiar categories. And then, as abruptly as they appeared, the Khazars vanished. By the 10th century, their influence began to wane. The Rus, a rising Slavic force from the north, began pressing into Khazar territory. Their trade routes weakened, their alliances frayed. Eventually, the Khazar capital was sacked, their cities abandoned, their name fading from the political maps of the world. No great battle marked their fall. No surviving account describes a dramatic last stand. The empire simply dissolved, absorbed, scattered, or lost. What happened to the Khazar people? Some believe they integrated into surrounding populations, Turkic, Slavic, and Jewish alike. Others claim they migrated westward. Here, the mystery takes a more controversial turn. In the 20th century, a theory gained traction, suggesting that many Eastern European Ashkenazi Jews might be descended in part from Khazar converts. This idea, largely based on the writings of a few medieval sources and championed by thinkers like Arthur Koestler in The 13th Tribe, has sparked intense academic and political debate. Most modern genetic studies lean against the theory, finding little to no direct Khazar connection in Ashkenazi lineages. But the question lingers in certain circles, not as fact, but as possibility. Other theories, more speculative still, claim that remnants of the Khazar nobility survived in secret, preserving traditions, language, even knowledge that never made it into Western records. Some researchers have even gone so far as to suggest links between Khazar refugees and the sudden appearance of Jewish communities in unexpected regions, from the Caucasus to the Carpathians, each carrying traces of a lost identity. But evidence is scarce. The Khazars left behind few writings and no known chronicles of their own. Their script, if they had one, has not survived. What we know comes mostly from outsiders, Arab historians, Byzantine diplomats, Jewish scholars, and fragments of diplomatic correspondence. It's as if the Khazars deliberately erased themselves, or were erased. What kind of empire leaves so little behind? No enduring monuments, no literary legacy, no widely spoken descendant language. How could a people so central to trade, politics, and religion simply dissolve? Perhaps it was the price of neutrality. In choosing a path that set them apart from both Christian and Muslim worlds, they ensured their isolation. And perhaps that very difference, once a source of strength, became their undoing. Today, the wind still moves across the open steppe where Khazar riders once passed. In the soil, archaeologists continue to find hints, burials, coins, strange inscriptions, but never quite enough, never the whole picture. Was the Khazar Empire truly lost, or merely hidden in plain sight? And if their memory remains buried beneath centuries of dust and silence, what might still be waiting to be uncovered? History often remembers the victors, but sometimes the most fascinating truths belong to those who simply disappeared. The Khazar Empire, mighty, elusive, and strangely silent, faded not with a bang, but with a slow retreat into historical shadow. Its disappearance leaves behind more questions than answers, but not all mysteries are buried in forgotten cities or lost lineages. Some sweep across the entire world, leaving no corner untouched. One such moment came not through war or empire, but through the sky itself. The sun rises, but the light is dim. Not gold, not blue, but gray, cold, and lifeless. Across Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, the day begins in silence. Crops fail to sprout, the air hangs thick and damp, and when people look up, they see a sky that refuses to shine. This is not the aftermath of battle or the start of winter. This is summer in the year 536, and something has gone terribly wrong. We know about the disasters of Pompeii. We study the fall of Rome. But few events in human history compare to what happened in this single, forgotten year. A global catastrophe so severe, so all-consuming, that it plunged much of the world into darkness for nearly 2 full years. And for centuries, no one could say why. The Byzantine historian Procopius, writing from Constantinople, described it bluntly. The sun gave forth its light without brightness, like the moon, during the whole year. Elsewhere, Irish monks recorded a failure of bread. Chinese scribes noted that snow fell in the middle of summer. In Syria, there were reports of famine and plague. Entire harvests failed across continents. Temperatures dropped dramatically. And as the skies dimmed and the world cooled, chaos followed. Famine swept across Europe and Asia. Social unrest surged. In China, crops failed, and the Northern Wei dynasty teetered. In Europe, the collapse of food systems paved the way for a new wave of disease, the plague of Justinian, which would go on to kill millions. In some regions, people starved not only from lack of food, but from a world that no longer obeyed the rules of time and season. What could have caused such a global crisis? For generations, historians could only speculate. Was it a divine punishment? A celestial omen? A sign of the end times? Theories ranged from comets to cosmic dust, from distant wars to acts of God. But none could fully explain the scale or timing of what became known as the Dark Year. Then, in the last few decades, science began to catch up with mystery. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica revealed something remarkable: a sudden, sharp spike in atmospheric sulfate levels around the year 536. This pointed to a massive volcanic eruption, one so powerful that it launched ash and sulfur into the stratosphere, where it lingered for years, blocking sunlight, altering climate, and dimming the skies across the globe. Further studies now suggest the culprit may have been a volcano in Iceland, possibly the Veiðivötn or Katla system. But it wasn't just one eruption. The ice cores show a second event around 540 and possibly a third soon after. A chain reaction. A global cooling cycle that ushered in what scientists call the Late Antique Little Ice Age. But even this explanation, grounded in data and geology, leaves unanswered questions. Why do no local records, no Icelandic oral traditions, no Norse legends mention an eruption of that magnitude? Could it have come from another, yet unidentified source in the tropics? Some point to the El Salvador region, or the Rabaul caldera in Papua New Guinea. The exact location remains unconfirmed. And then, there's the curious matter of how suddenly the darkness spread. If the eruption had been massive, but isolated, why did the effects seem to ripple across the globe almost simultaneously? Why did cultures from vastly different regions, with no contact between them, report not just similar weather, but the same eerie dimness, the same apocalyptic tone? Was it only ash and aerosols, or was something else at play? More speculative thinkers have asked whether the volcanic explanation tells the whole story. Could there have been a comet or meteor impact, perhaps over the ocean, that left no obvious crater but launched enough debris into the sky to mimic a volcanic winter? Could there have been a solar event, an extreme reduction in solar output, or a cosmic cloud, affecting the Earth's climate from beyond our atmosphere? Some even wonder about the fragility of our historical memory. Is it possible that we once knew more about this catastrophe, and that those records were lost? Could a natural disaster so massive have also disrupted not just food and health, but entire systems of writing, record-keeping, and cultural continuity? The effects of 536 did not fade quickly. For nearly a decade, the climate remained unstable. Snow in June, famines that lasted for years, political systems weakened or collapsed, and from that void rose new empires, new religions, new ideas. It was, in a sense, a reset, not just of temperature, but of civilization itself. And yet, few people today know the name of the year. Few are taught that this one moment, silent, skyborne, and nearly invisible, may have altered the course of history more than any war or revolution. The darkness passed, but it left scars. In ancient tree rings, in polar ice, in forgotten texts scrawled by frightened hands, and perhaps, in some deep layer of cultural memory, a collective echo of the time the sun forgot to rise. What truly happened in the year 536? Was it simply nature at its most violent? Or was it something more? A warning, an omen, or an event whose full scale we still have yet to understand? The sky dimmed, the world shivered, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it felt like the end. But what ended, and what began, may still lie waiting beneath layers of ash, ice, and silence. The year 536 left the world dimmed and shaken. It was a global catastrophe not born of war, but of sky and shadow, something beyond control, beyond understanding. And yet, sometimes history's darkest moments come not from the heavens, but from within, from people, from fear, and from the silencing of a single voice that dared to illuminate too much. The Mediterranean glistens beyond the white stone harbor of Alexandria, where the wind carries both salt and smoke. In the early 5th century, this city was more than a port. It was a beacon, a place where scrolls lined the halls of libraries, where philosophies clashed in open forums, and where knowledge was not merely preserved, it was cultivated. Alexandria had once been home to the Great Library, to generations of scholars, to astronomers who charted the stars, and mathematicians who bent numbers into meaning. And among them, there was Hypatia. She was a teacher, a philosopher, and a scientist, a woman of letters in a world ruled by men. The daughter of Theon, a mathematician himself, Hypatia rose to prominence not only for her brilliance, but for her clarity, of thought, of speech, of principle. She taught in the Neoplatonist tradition, guiding students through the mysteries of geometry, astronomy, and ethics. She drew followers from across the Mediterranean, pagans, Christians, men in robes of political office and sandals of peasantry alike came to hear her speak. Her classroom was the street, her blackboard the sand, her voice calm and measured. And then, she was murdered, not by thieves, not by rival philosophers, but by a mob. In March of 415 CE, Hypatia was dragged from her chariot by a group of Christian zealots. They stripped her, flayed her skin with sharpened tiles, and tore her body apart. Her remains were burned, her name cursed, her teachings buried beneath fear and fury. The official story is a complex one. The city was in political turmoil. Religious tensions between Christian factions and pagan intellectuals had reached a breaking point. At the center of it all was a bitter rivalry between the Christian bishop Cyril of Alexandria and the Roman governor Orestes, a former student and ally of Hypatia. Some say her death was political, that she was perceived as an advisor, perhaps even a puppet master behind Orestes. Others claim it was religious, that her pagan background, her public status, and her influence made her a target in a city shifting rapidly toward Christian dominance. But history often simplifies what it cannot fully understand. Was Hypatia truly killed for what she represented, or for what she knew? Her surviving writings are few: commentaries on Ptolemy's Almagest, works on conic sections, letters preserved by her students. But what has been lost is far greater. Could she have held manuscripts now vanished with time? Was she, perhaps, one of the last living links to the great library of Alexandria? A keeper of texts no longer deemed safe or appropriate for a changing world? And what of her death itself? Some accounts are graphic and detailed, others vague and inconsistent. Even the identities of her attackers remain obscured, described only as followers of Peter the Reader, a minor ecclesiastical figure whose motivations remain murky. Was this a spontaneous act of rage, or a carefully orchestrated purge? What's most unsettling is what followed. The silence. No formal investigation, no imperial trial. Bishop Cyril, though likely politically entangled in the events, was never condemned. In fact, he was later canonized, Saint Cyril of Alexandria. And Hypatia, once a symbol of reason, was transformed in many records into a vague pagan witch, or omitted entirely. Only centuries later did her name re-emerge, revived by Renaissance thinkers, Enlightenment philosophers, and modern historians. Today, she is often seen as a martyr for science, for reason, for secular knowledge. But in her own time, she may have simply been seen as dangerous. A woman, independent and unbound, a mind too sharp for the political powers of the day. The Hypatian Revolt is not merely the story of a death, it is the story of a transition. A turning point when Alexandria, and perhaps the broader ancient world, began to shift from open inquiry to orthodoxy, from philosophical pluralism to institutional control, from memory into mystery. Some fringe theorists have speculated that Hypatia's death was part of a larger, coordinated effort to extinguish forbidden knowledge, mathematical truths, astronomical models, philosophical systems that contradicted the growing dogmas of the time. There are whispers, never proven, that she possessed maps of the heavens more accurate than her era should have allowed, that she taught of orbits and eclipses centuries before such ideas became accepted, that her mind held remnants of Pythagorean mysticism, Platonic cosmology, and Egyptian secrets now long gone. These are not claims of magic or conspiracy, but they do raise a question. What knowledge dies with a single mind? Hypatia left no heirs, no disciples who continued her public teaching. Her school was dissolved. Her voice was silenced not just by death, but by erasure. And Alexandria, once the shining city of ancient learning, never again held the same intellectual prominence. Today, her story lives in fragments, in letters, in reconstructed texts, in fiction and film. But the truth of who she was and what she might have carried remains a puzzle with missing pieces. Was Hypatia the last guardian of something we have yet to rediscover? Or merely a bright light extinguished by the rising tide of her time? The wind still moves through the ruins of Alexandria. The harbor remains. The stones have seen centuries pass. But the questions linger, softly, persistently, like waves against forgotten marble. What was lost when Hypatia fell? And what, if anything, still lies hidden in the sands she once walked? The streets of Alexandria once echoed with voices of knowledge, philosophers, mathematicians, seekers of truth. When Hypatia fell, something more than a life ended. It marked a shift, a subtle unraveling of memory. And yet, her death was not an isolated moment. Across the world, across generations, other silences began to grow. Forgotten not by accident, but perhaps by design. Imagine walking through the ruins of an ancient city. The columns still stand, weathered but proud. Inscriptions curl across their surfaces, written in scripts no longer spoken. Fragments of pottery lie in the dust, carefully shaped, once functional, now mute. The people who built these walls are gone. But what they knew, that's what lingers. Or perhaps, what doesn't. Because what's striking is not just the emptiness, but the silence, the gaps. There are entire stretches of time in human history where we seem to know less than we should. Civilizations rise with remarkable sophistication, building monuments aligned with the stars, practicing complex agriculture, designing tools and calendars. And then, seemingly overnight, something shifts. Not just a fall, but a forgetting. We call it the Great Forgetting. Not a single event, but a pattern. A recurring phenomenon in which vast amounts of human knowledge, scientific, technical, cultural, appear to vanish from the historical record. Some call it a byproduct of war, others the result of natural disaster. But the deeper one looks, the more elusive the answers become. Consider the case of Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey, one of the oldest known cities dating back over 9,000 years. Here, Neolithic people built tightly packed, multi-level homes entered through the roof. They painted complex murals. They buried their dead beneath living spaces in a way that suggested ritual continuity and social structure. And yet, there is no clear evidence of writing. No texts, no lineage of ideas passed forward. The site was abandoned, and the knowledge within, lost. Or look to Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley. Around 2500 BCE, it boasted an advanced sewage system that would rival some early modern cities. Gridded streets, public baths, standardized weights and measures. But the script they used, the Indus script, remains undeciphered to this day. And when the civilization collapsed, much of its knowledge went with it. Not gradually, but all at once. And what of Antikythera, the Greek mechanism found in a shipwreck off the coast of Crete? A device built in the 2nd century BCE, capable of modeling the movements of celestial bodies with astonishing precision. Some call it the world's first computer. And yet, for over 1,000 years afterward, there is no record of similar technology anywhere. No trail of development, as if someone had reached too far ahead and then was forgotten. Could all of these be coincidences? Natural cycles of rise and fall? Or is there something more at play? The term Great Forgetting first appeared in anthropological circles as a way to describe how early human cultures seemed to abandon knowledge, tools, social systems, or religious practices for reasons unclear. But it has since grown into something more, a mystery that stretches from the ancient world to the modern. Why is it that humanity sometimes forgets what it once knew? Some point to oral tradition. Before writing, knowledge was held in memory, passed down generation to generation through story, song, and ritual. If a community was displaced by war, famine, or natural disaster, that chain could break in a single lifetime. Everything not carved in stone would vanish, not because it wasn't valued, but because it was held too lightly. Others suggest that forgetting is not merely accidental, but intentional. That as power shifts, new regimes often suppress old ideas. Libraries are burned, languages erased, maps redrawn. Sometimes, forgetting is a tool of control. We've seen it. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria, the burning of Mayan codices, the state-sponsored suppression of knowledge during totalitarian regimes. Over and over, history shows us that memory is vulnerable, not just to time, but to ideology. Still, others turn to more speculative ideas. Could there have been ancient global catastrophes, comets, solar flares, supervolcanoes, that reset civilization multiple times, leaving survivors to rebuild without the knowledge of those who came before? Geological records show massive climate events, sudden population drops, unexplained shifts in global temperature. Were these disruptions strong enough to break the line of knowledge entirely? And then there is a deeper, more psychological possibility. That forgetting is built into the human condition. As societies grow, they specialize. Knowledge becomes compartmentalized, stored in experts and systems few understand in full. When those systems fall, when a class of scribes, engineers, or astronomers disappears, the knowledge they carried becomes inaccessible, even incomprehensible. A text written in a dead language, a machine built with forgotten principles, a star chart whose meanings have faded from memory. Is this the fate of all knowledge? To be remembered for a time, and then slowly, quietly, lost? There are hints that more may have been forgotten than we realize. Petroglyphs that resemble astronomical diagrams, megalithic sites whose purposes we can only guess, oral traditions describing previous worlds or times before the sun. Are these mythologies or memories? We may never know. What we do know is this: for all our advancements, human history is not a clear progression. It is not a steady climb toward the present. It is a patchwork of brilliance and collapse, memory and silence, discovery and loss. And somewhere in that silence is the great forgetting. A question not just of what we've lost, but why we keep losing it. So what else has slipped through the cracks? What knowledge once shaped the world, and now lies buried, waiting to be remembered again? And if forgetting is the natural rhythm of civilization, how much do we still have time to remember? When civilizations forget, they don't always forget evenly. Knowledge disappears, names vanish, entire systems are lost to time. But some absences feel deliberate, specific, persistent. It's not only what history forgets, but who. From the faded pages of scrolls to the uncarved lines on stone, there lies a silence deeper than ignorance. A silence that belongs to voices never recorded or carefully removed. A silence shaped like half the human race. In the halls of ancient temples, in the margins of medieval manuscripts, in statues whose inscriptions have been worn smooth by time, there is something missing. Not completely, but conspicuously. The faces of women, their names, their stories. The deeper we look into the past, the more we find not an absence of women, but an absence of memory. Where did they go? Consider the fragments we do have. In Sumer, over 4,000 years ago, a woman named Enheduanna composed hymns so rich and structured that many scholars credit her as the world's first named author, man or woman, a priestess, a poet, a political figure. And yet, her legacy was nearly lost, surviving only in clay tablets buried for centuries beneath layers of earth and conquest. In ancient Egypt, Hatshepsut ruled not as queen, but as pharaoh. She wore the royal beard, conducted military campaigns, and commissioned grand temples. Her reign brought peace and prosperity. But after her death, her name and image were chiseled off monuments, erased from official records as if she had never existed. In classical Greece, Agnatis disguised herself as a man to study medicine. Women were barred from practicing at the time. Her skills saved lives, and once revealed, her presence forced legal reform. Yet she too is often footnoted, her story questioned, her legacy debated. And these are just the names we managed to recover. How many more were not written down? How many were deliberately omitted? How many ideas, inventions, discoveries, or decisions that shaped the world came from hands and minds that were later excluded from the telling? It's tempting to believe history simply overlooked women. But overlooked may be too soft a word. In many ancient societies, the names of kings, warriors, and male scholars were etched in stone, intended to outlast time itself. Women's contributions, when recorded at all, were often attached to men. Daughter of, wife of, consort to. Even when they ruled, they often did so under borrowed titles, wearing the language and dress of men just to be remembered. In some cases, entire histories were revised. When Wu Zetian, the only female emperor in Chinese history, rose to power during the Tang dynasty, she was vilified in later records, portrayed as cruel, manipulative, unnatural. Yet her rule was marked by reforms, cultural revival, and a flowering of the arts. Her memory was rewritten by those who followed, not erased, but reshaped. Similarly, in medieval Europe, female scholars and mystics like Hildegard of Bingen left vast collections of work, astronomical writings, music, medicine, theology, only to be remembered centuries later, long after their influence had faded from the mainstream narrative. Was it because these women threatened the established order? Because their existence complicated the idea of who held power, and why? Some theorists suggest that the erasure was systematic, that during periods of social consolidation, when empires formed, when religions established orthodoxy, when knowledge moved from oral to written form, women's stories were intentionally left out to reinforce patriarchal norms. Others believe it was more subtle, that the mediums of preservation, stone, ink, law, were dominated by men, and so the world remembered what men thought worth remembering. There are stranger theories, too. Some fringe researchers point to archaeological anomalies, unusual burials of high-status women in unexpected places, tools or inscriptions that don't match the gender roles assumed for their time. Were these hints of a parallel legacy, one we simply haven't learned to read yet? Could ancient matriarchal societies, once theorized in the 19th and 20th centuries, have existed on a larger scale than previously accepted? Mainstream historians remain cautious, citing limited evidence. But the absence of proof is not always proof of absence, especially in a record so unevenly preserved. And then, there is the language itself. In countless cultures, names were passed through male lines, land inherited through sons, titles conferred by fathers. How many women's names were never recorded simply because the structure of memory did not allow it? Even today, historical databases and archives are overwhelmingly male. When researchers search records, they often find women categorized under their husbands' identities, their given names lost to marriage, translation, or transcription. This is not ancient history. It is ongoing. But the silence is not complete. Each year, scholars uncover new documents, digital reconstructions of faded texts, deciphered letters, hidden signatures beneath old paintings. The recovery is slow, but persistent, like a long-lost voice returning, syllable by syllable. And as these names re-emerge, a new question begins to form. Not just who was erased, but what ideas were lost with them. What philosophies went unspoken. What scientific insights never left the private journals of women not allowed to publish? What revolutions died in whispers because their authors had no platform to shout? In the great story of humanity, we are missing entire chapters, not because they were never written, but because someone tore them out. And so we are left with ruins, echoes, and questions. What would history look like if all voices had been remembered? What knowledge waits in the margins, in the footnotes, in the unwritten spaces between lines? Perhaps we are only beginning to rediscover what was always there, hidden not in darkness, but in silence. And in that silence, the erased women of history still wait to be heard. The quiet erasure of women from the historical record reminds us that not all loss is physical. Some absences are woven into the very way stories are told. But not all silences are quiet. Some are violent. Some are loud enough to echo across centuries. And in the hills of southern France, the ruins of castles and chapels still carry the weight of one such silence, carved into stone by sword and flame, in a crusade not against a foreign land, but against fellow Christians. High in the Languedoc hills, where limestone cliffs cradle ancient villages and olive groves shimmer beneath a pale sun, the remains of fortress walls cling to mountaintops like forgotten sentinels. The wind carries the scent of thyme and lavender, and something older, less tangible: memory, or maybe grief. These lands once belonged to the Occitans, a people with their own language, their own traditions, and for a time, a striking degree of tolerance. Here, in the 12th and early 13th centuries, Catholic and heterodox communities lived side by side. Nobles patronized poets and troubadours. Philosophical debates were not only permitted, they were celebrated. Into this space, a new form of Christianity quietly took root. They called themselves good men and good women. The church would call them Cathars. Their beliefs were radical, for the time, and perhaps even for today. The Cathars saw the material world as corrupt, created not by God, but by a malevolent force. True purity, they believed, meant rejecting the physical and embracing the spiritual. They denied the authority of the Catholic Church. They rejected the sacraments. Some even claimed Christ was not a man, but a divine being who never truly suffered. But the Cathars were not violent. They were not a political threat in the usual sense. They were not trying to seize power, only to live by what they believed. And yet, to the Church, especially one already struggling with heresy and reform, their ideas were too dangerous to ignore. In 1208, after the papal legate Pierre de Castelnau was murdered, likely by an Occitan noble, the Pope launched an unprecedented campaign, a crusade, not against Muslims in the Holy Land, but against fellow Christians in Europe. The Albigensian Crusade, named for the town of Albi, would become one of the most brutal campaigns in medieval history. Tens of thousands were killed, entire towns were razed, lands were seized, cultures uprooted. It was a war not just of faith, but of identity, and of erasure. One of the most infamous moments came in Béziers in July 1209. When asked how to distinguish Cathars from Catholics in the city, a papal commander is said to have replied, "Kill them all, God will know his own." Whether he truly said those words remains debated, but the massacre was real. As many as 20,000 people, men, women, children, were slaughtered. The city was burned, and that was only the beginning. For 2 decades, the crusade continued, military campaigns followed by inquisitions, and inquisitions followed by executions. Cathar leaders were captured, tortured, burned. The once autonomous Occitan lords were forced to bend to the northern French crown. By the 1240s, the Cathar movement had been crushed, but something strange lingers in the aftermath. Despite the scale of the violence, despite the destruction of an entire spiritual movement, very little of the Cathars' own words survive. Their theology was known mostly through the documents of their enemies. Few original Cathar texts remain, some preserved by accident, some only referenced secondhand. Was their silence due to illiteracy? Or did they purposely keep oral traditions, wary of persecution? Did their beliefs threaten more than church dogma, perhaps challenging deeper assumptions about material power, gender roles, or the very foundations of medieval order? Some researchers have suggested that the Cathars practiced a more egalitarian spiritual system, that women could hold spiritual authority, that wealth and property were rejected not just in theory, but in daily life. Were they simply a Christian heresy, or the remnant of a more ancient, perhaps pre-Christian tradition? The Cathars spoke of reincarnation, of cycles of purification, of the prison of flesh. Some see echoes of Gnostic beliefs, systems once common in the early centuries of Christianity, later branded heretical and wiped out. Could the Cathars have preserved ideas thought lost for 1,000 years? More fringe voices have drawn connections between Cathar beliefs and Eastern mysticism, pointing to potential links along trade routes that carried not just goods, but philosophies. Others speculate that the Cathars possessed esoteric knowledge, perhaps even texts from the early Christian world, that had escaped the purges of Rome. The Church's urgency, they argue, was not just about theology, it was about control over hidden truths. Of course, these theories remain unproven, but the mystery remains. Why such complete and merciless destruction? What the Albigensian Crusade truly extinguished may be more than a belief system. It may have been a worldview, one that offered a different relationship to faith, to community, to the very structure of society. A worldview that, if allowed to thrive, might have reshaped medieval Europe. Today, the castles still stand, abandoned, hollowed out by time. Their stones weathered, their staircases leading nowhere. In the village of Montségur, where the last major Cathar stronghold fell in 1244, a plaque marks the place where more than 200 were burned alive for refusing to renounce their faith. No great monument, no museum of their memory, just wind, stone, and silence. What did the Cathars believe that was so dangerous it had to be wiped from history? What words did they speak that could not be allowed to echo? And what truths, spiritual or otherwise, might have died with them in the fire? We may never know, but sometimes the scale of the forgetting tells us how powerful the memory must have been. And in the ruins of Occitania, something waits. Not just the ghosts of the fallen, but the questions they left behind. The Cathars were extinguished by fire and sword, their voices reduced to rumor and echo. But not all lost peoples vanished under siege. Some disappeared more slowly, across waves and winds, on distant islands where memory is harder to trace. Beyond the reach of crusaders and empires, another culture faded, one that still haunts the stones, the caves, and the mountains of the sea. Off the northwestern coast of Africa, 7 volcanic islands rise abruptly from the Atlantic Ocean, jagged and sunburnt, suspended between continents. The Canary Islands are windswept and ancient, landscapes of black lava rock, pine forests clinging to mountainsides, and coastal cliffs that plunge into turquoise sea. Today, they are known for their beaches, their tourism, and their mild climate. But centuries before any European stepped ashore, these islands were home to a people whose origins remain one of the most enduring mysteries of the Atlantic world. They were called the Guanches. When Spanish explorers arrived in the 15th century, they were astonished to find people living on the islands who bore no resemblance to the Berbers of nearby North Africa, nor to sub-Saharan peoples, nor to Mediterranean Europeans. The Guanches were tall, with fair skin, and in many cases light-colored hair. They used no boats and had no written language. They lived in caves, raised livestock, mummified their dead, and practiced complex social customs that baffled the outsiders who encountered them. Who were they? And how did they get here? Mainstream historians believe the Guanches were likely of Berber descent, possibly arriving by boat from North Africa sometime between 1000 BCE and the early 1st millennium CE. Linguistic traces and DNA studies suggest a connection to the Amazigh peoples of the Maghreb. But if that is true, why did they forget how to sail? When the Spanish first made contact, the Guanches possessed no seafaring technology. They had no canoes, no rafts, no harbors. Despite living on islands separated by only a few miles, some Guanche tribes had no contact with neighboring islands for generations. In a world surrounded by water, they lived as if stranded. Some theorize that early seafaring knowledge was lost over time, perhaps due to isolation, cultural taboo, or environmental hardship. Others suggest that the Guanches may never have been seafarers at all, but arrived by accident, castaways from a distant shore, carried on ocean currents to a new and final home. But the questions go deeper. How did a people with no contact to the outside world preserve the art of mummification? On the island of Tenerife, archaeologists have discovered carefully prepared Guanche mummies, wrapped in animal skins, preserved with resin and herbs. The techniques bear striking similarities to Egyptian and Andean practices, yet there is no direct link, no trade routes, no shared texts, no known influence. And what of their language? Fragments survive, mostly through Spanish transcriptions, and show clear Berber roots. But there are words and phrases that resist classification, hinting at either a long period of isolation or influence from unknown sources. They also practiced a form of whistled language, still used in modified form today in La Gomera. Known as Silbo Gomero, it allowed them to communicate across vast valleys and ravines. It's a fully functional, complex mode of speech, a whistled echo of spoken Guanche, preserved in the wind. Then there is the matter of their religion. The Guanches believed in a supreme deity, often associated with the sky and light, and a dualistic struggle between good and evil. Some scholars have drawn comparisons to Zoroastrianism or other ancient Indo-European traditions. But again, no direct link can be proven. Their rituals involved sacred mountains, offerings, and seasonal observances, rooted in nature and deeply spiritual, yet largely undocumented. What little we know of Guanche spirituality comes from Spanish chroniclers, many of whom saw their beliefs as pagan, primitive, or heretical. As with many indigenous cultures, the lens through which their story was recorded was distorted, colored by conquest, by faith, and by fear. By the late 1400s, the Spanish conquest of the Canary Islands was underway. Fierce battles were fought. Guanche resistance was intense, but fractured. Without weapons of metal, without alliances, and lacking a centralized government, they were gradually overrun. And then, almost overnight, they disappeared. Not entirely. Genetically, the Guanches live on. Many Canary Islanders today carry Guanche ancestry, but their culture, their language, their belief system, all of it was systematically suppressed, dismantled, or absorbed. Within a century of conquest, the Guanches ceased to exist as a distinct people, or so it is said. Some researchers believe remnants of Guanche culture persist in rural customs, in place names, in oral histories quietly passed down. Others have speculated that the Guanches might not have been isolated at all, but were part of a forgotten Atlantic tradition. Fringe theories propose pre-Columbian transoceanic contact, ancient sea routes that linked Africa, Europe, and the Americas long before Columbus. Some even suggest that the Guanches were survivors of a much older civilization, cast adrift after some distant catastrophe. No evidence supports these claims definitively, but their allure endures. Because the Guanches, like many forgotten peoples, represent a gap in the map. A culture that should have had more connection, more continuity, more memory, and yet remains shrouded in silence. They are neither myth nor legend, but their truth feels strangely out of reach, buried not in time, but in distance. The mountains of Tenerife still rise above the clouds. The caves are still there. The wind still carries voices across the ravines. And somewhere, beneath the surface of volcanic stone, lies a story waiting to be told. Who were the Guanches, really? Were they isolated survivors, or forgotten inheritors of a deeper past? And what other cultures, silent, scattered, erased, might still be hiding on the edges of the map? On the wind-swept plateaus of the Canary Islands, the Guanches vanished not in fire or conquest alone, but in quiet erasure, leaving behind echoes, not explanations. But some disappearances leave behind more than mystery. They leave ruins, cities swallowed by time, and entire civilizations buried under the weight of shifting narratives. Far from the Atlantic, in the fertile Nile Delta, one such place once stood. A capital of power, trade, and rule. Now almost forgotten. Avaris. In the northeastern corner of Egypt, where the Nile branches into its delta and the land begins to dissolve into green marshes and soft, silty soil, lie the faded remnants of a city once grand enough to rival Memphis or Thebes. The modern name is Tel el-Daba, but in antiquity it was known as Avaris, a city of foreigners, a city of kings, a city of questions. In the second intermediate period of Egyptian history, roughly 1650 to 1550 BCE, Avaris became the capital of the Hyksos, a mysterious people who came to rule northern Egypt for nearly a century. Their origins are debated. Their culture was a blend of Egyptian customs and something else, something from beyond the desert, carried in on trade winds, wars, and migrations. To the Egyptians, the Hyksos were outsiders, invaders, usurpers. But the truth may be more complicated. The name Hyksos comes from the Egyptian Heka Kasut, meaning rulers of foreign lands. They were likely a Semitic-speaking people, perhaps from Canaan or the Levant, but they did not arrive as conquerors overnight. Archaeological evidence suggests a gradual migration into the delta over generations, merchants, laborers, settlers, who rose in influence until, eventually, they seized political power. Avaris was their stronghold. Excavations reveal a city alive with diversity, palatial compounds, rich tombs, warehouses, temples, evidence of foreign pottery, Levantine architecture, and Mesopotamian cylinder seals. Horses and chariots, new to Egypt, appear here for the first time, symbols of military innovation. The Hyksos may have introduced these elements to Egypt, reshaping its warfare, economy, and diplomacy. But Avaris was more than a military base. It was a cosmopolitan hub, a city of trade and fusion, where Egyptian religion mixed with Canaanite deities, and where the boundaries between native and foreign blurred. It was here that Baal shared space with Set, that scripts and symbols crossed borders, and that a new, hybridized Egypt briefly emerged. And yet, the city was erased. When the Theban dynasty rose in the south and drove the Hyksos from power, Avaris fell. The pharaoh Ahmose I led a campaign that reclaimed the delta and razed the Hyksos capital. Temples were destroyed, records silenced, and in time, the name of Avaris vanished from Egyptian history. It was only rediscovered in the 20th century. Led by Austrian archaeologist Manfred Bietak, the excavations at Tel el-Daba began to reveal a city that had lain buried for millennia. A city that had not been built, as tradition claimed, by invaders, but by people who had lived there, integrated, traded, and eventually ruled. But the mystery deepens. Among the ruins, archaeologists found evidence of mass graves, hurried burials with signs of trauma. Some believe this may reflect a final, desperate battle for the city. Others suggest a plague, epidemic illness sweeping through the crowded quarters. And then, there are the abrupt changes in building style, as if the city had gone through phases of sudden cultural shifts. Even more intriguing is the presence of Semitic-style homes built beside Egyptian-style temples. It's not a picture of foreign rule replacing Egyptian identity, it's a picture of coexistence, or something more layered. What really happened in Avaris? Was it a conquest from without, or a revolution from within? And this brings us to one of the most controversial connections. In later centuries, a story emerged, told by Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions, of a Semitic people who once lived in Egypt, who were enslaved, and who departed in a great exodus. Some scholars, particularly in the 19th and early 20th centuries, speculated that the Hyksos were the basis for the Exodus narrative. Others strongly rejected this idea. Today, the academic consensus leans toward caution. The timeline of the Hyksos does not align with most traditional datings of the Exodus, but the similarities, foreign Semitic rulers, sudden collapse, possible plagues, a destroyed capital, have kept the theory alive in some circles. Could the memory of the Hyksos have been preserved, not in Egyptian records, but in oral traditions passed down through generations of displaced peoples? Could Avaris, in some fragmentary way, be the shadow of a biblical memory? More fringe theories go further. Some suggest that Avaris was home to ancient knowledge carried from the East, astrological systems, medical practices, even hidden scrolls lost when the city fell. There are whispers of underground chambers, of temples still buried beneath modern farmland. None of these claims are verified, but they persist. Why? Perhaps because Avaris is not just a city, it is a gap in the record, a place that flourished, ruled, and then was systematically deleted from official history. Today, Tel El Daba is quiet, a flat expanse of earth and ruins, often overlooked by tourists. No great monuments rise from the soil, no temples beckon from afar. And yet, beneath the ground lies layer upon layer of cultural entanglement, proof that history is never as clean as the chronicles suggest. Who were the Hyksos, really? Did they steal a kingdom, or build one? And what secrets still lie hidden beneath the Nile's fertile floodplain? In the silence of Avaris, something endures. Not just the memory of a lost kingdom, but the possibility that what we call foreign is sometimes only what we have chosen to forget. In the ruins of Avaris, we find traces of forgotten rulers and suppressed memory, a capital buried not just beneath earth, but beneath narrative. But not all forgotten places were grand. Some vanished not in flame, but in simplicity. Some left behind no monuments, only quiet defiance. And nestled in the green hills of central Italy, there once stood such a place, a tiny republic born of a border mistake, which survived for centuries through secrecy, stubbornness, and a stroke of bureaucratic luck. In the rolling hills between Tuscany and Umbria, where vineyards stretch like patchwork across the landscape and cypress trees stand watch over sleepy villages, there is a place so small you might pass it without noticing. Today, it's just a cluster of houses, a chapel, a sign. But for nearly 400 years, it was something far more curious. The Republic of Cospaia, a micronation born not of revolution or conquest, but of a clerical error. It began in 1440, when Pope Eugene IV, deep in financial debt, sold a slice of land to the Republic of Florence. The transaction was part of a larger effort to settle papal debts, and the map was redrawn accordingly. But there was a mistake. A small strip of land, roughly a kilometer wide and several kilometers long, was left off the official documents. Caught between two great powers, this narrow buffer zone was claimed by neither. And so the locals, rather than wait for the church or Florence to correct the oversight, simply declared independence. Thus was born Cospaia, a tiny republic that no one intended to create. What followed is one of history's quietest anomalies. Cospaia had no army, no formal government, no official laws, and yet it endured for 386 years. A free republic nestled in the heart of Renaissance Italy, untouched by most of the wars and political upheavals that engulfed Europe. How? Part of the answer lies in its geography. Cospaia was small, obscure, and easy to overlook. The powerful city-states around it, Florence, the Papal States, were more interested in their grand affairs than in policing a handful of independent farmers. For centuries, Cospaia existed in a kind of political blind spot, shielded by its own irrelevance. But the Republic's survival was not just a matter of luck. It also came from adaptation. Cospaia became known for its tobacco cultivation, a practice banned in many neighboring regions under religious or economic restrictions. But in Cospaia, with no pope to issue prohibitions and no duke to collect taxes, tobacco thrived. The Republic became a smuggler's haven. Merchants came quietly from across Italy to buy the contraband crop, fueling a local economy that flourished in secrecy. The phrase "perpetua et firma libertas," perpetual and steadfast freedom, became the unofficial motto of Cospaia, a phrase still etched on stones and remembered by locals today. But how did such a fragile place resist occupation for so long? Why didn't one of the surrounding powers simply absorb it? Some suggest that Cospaia's independence was tolerated, seen as a useful loophole, a neutral ground, even a buffer. Others believe that both Florence and the Papal States quietly benefited from the illicit trade, or at least found it more convenient to let the anomaly persist than to fix it. There are more speculative theories as well. Some claim that Cospaia was protected by secret alliances, that certain nobles or merchants had vested interests in its autonomy and pulled strings to preserve its status. A few fringe historians go further, suggesting that Cospaia was home to esoteric groups, spiritual communities, or philosophical societies that required political freedom to operate without interference. There's no direct evidence for these claims, but Cospaia's longevity continues to puzzle scholars. Micronations usually vanish quickly, swallowed by neighbors, forgotten by history. But Cospaia endured for centuries, almost invisibly. What's perhaps most remarkable is what Cospaia lacked. There were no taxes, no jails, no bureaucracy. Conflict was resolved communally, often with the help of elders or informal assemblies. Church and state were not separate, because there was no state. And yet, the society functioned. People farmed, traded, married, raised families, lived and died under no flag but their own. Cospaia's end came not with conquest, but with resignation. In 1826, after centuries of de facto independence, the tiny republic formally ceded itself, half to the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, half to the Papal States. It was peaceful, voluntary, and barely noticed by the rest of the world. The republic simply stopped existing, as quietly as it had begun. Today, only a few markers remain: a boundary stone, a fragment of wall, oral traditions passed down by descendants who still speak of their strange heritage with quiet pride. But questions linger. Why did the powers of the day allow this political anomaly to continue for so long? What ideas were nurtured in its freedom, economic, spiritual, philosophical, that were stifled elsewhere? And could Cospaia's model, simple and decentralized, suggest that complexity isn't always a requirement for stability? In an age dominated by kings, popes, and empires, Cospaia was an outlier, a living contradiction, a whisper of a different way to organize society, one not built on power or conquest, but on absence, a republic born from nothing, and perhaps in some quiet way, still echoing through the hills of Umbria. What else in history has lasted simply because it was forgotten? And how many other anomalies, tiny, unrecorded, self-contained worlds, might still lie hidden in the margins of maps? Cospaia vanished without resistance, its quiet independence dissolving into history like mist on the Umbrian hills. It was forgotten, not through violence, but through neglect, an accident of borders, preserved by indifference. But not all mysteries are places. Some are objects, tangible, cold to the touch, and still utterly incomprehensible. Objects that survived empire, time, and decay, only to defy explanation. One such artifact has been found again and again across Roman Europe, and yet no one can say what it truly was for. In the drawers of European museums, in the quiet corners of private collections, and occasionally unearthed by farmers or metal detectorists in muddy fields, there lies a small, solid enigma. Made of bronze or sometimes stone, 12 flat pentagonal faces connect at sharp angles, forming a near-perfect geometric shape, a dodecahedron. At each corner, rounded knobs protrude like blunt antennae, and at the center of every face, a hole, some wide, some narrow, each carefully crafted. There are no inscriptions, no markings, no instructions, just symmetry and silence. Over 120 of these strange objects have been found across the former Roman Empire, from northern England to Hungary, from France to Switzerland. Always within the western provinces, never in the heartlands of Rome itself. Always found isolated, no clear context, no mention in any surviving Roman texts. What were they? And why did no Roman author, so meticulous in their record-keeping, ever describe them? That silence is part of what makes the Roman dodecahedron such a haunting artifact. For an empire known for its practicality, its infrastructure, its relentless documentation of civic and military life, these objects are an anomaly. They do not appear in inventories. They are absent from mosaics, paintings, frescoes. No surviving scrolls refer to them. It's as if they were deliberately excluded, or never meant to be explained at all. Some researchers believe they were tools. One prevailing theory suggests they were measuring devices, used perhaps for determining the optimal sowing dates based on sunlight, with the dodecahedron acting as a kind of handheld solar gauge. The varying sizes of the holes might allow light to pass through in specific ways during different times of year, aligning with agricultural needs. Others propose a more mechanical function. Could they have been calibration tools for artillery or water systems, knitting frames for gloves, candle holders, surveying instruments, or even military signal devices? Each theory comes with its own compelling logic and its own contradictions. Many dodecahedrons have been found in graves or near religious sites, far from places where technical instruments would likely have been used. Their craftsmanship suggests precision, yet no two are exactly alike in size or design. Some have ridged holes, others are smooth. Some contain traces of wear, others seem unused, and still the mystery endures. Speculative voices have gone further. Could the dodecahedrons have held symbolic or ritualistic meaning? Their shape, the 12-faced dodecahedron, was associated in Platonic philosophy with the cosmos itself, representing the heavens. In this view, perhaps the dodecahedrons were not tools, but cosmic models, spiritual talismans, or objects used in unknown rites. Some have suggested they were used for divination. Held in the hand, light passing through holes, casting shadows or beams that meant something only to the initiated. Could these have been the instruments of a lost mystery cult? Something personal, esoteric, and meant to be hidden from common view? More fringe theories speculate even further. Some propose the dodecahedrons were astronomical calculators, akin to a very simplified Antikythera mechanism, used to chart the movement of stars, or perhaps to track celestial events important to agricultural or religious calendars. Others believe they had mystical properties, linked to early forms of sacred geometry, designed to connect with metaphysical forces beyond what we would call science or superstition. And then there are those who entertain more speculative ideas still, that these objects may not have been Roman at all, but inherited from an older, forgotten civilization. A memory passed down not in stories, but in shape. But for all the theories, one fact remains. We still don't know. Not definitively, not convincingly. There is something both humbling and haunting about that. In an age of decoding genomes, of scanning ancient texts with multispectral imaging, of uncovering entire cities from space, there remains a small, bronze object, cold and unyielding, that we simply cannot explain. Perhaps it was never meant to be understood. Perhaps the meaning of the dodecahedron was private, even sacred, held in the minds of a few artisans or mystics whose knowledge died with them. Or perhaps it was something utterly mundane, a child's toy, a forgotten novelty, a tool so obvious to its users that no one thought to write it down. But the silence it leaves behind is powerful. The Roman Dodecahedron reminds us that not all mysteries are lost through fire or conquest. Some are lost simply because no one asked the right question at the right time. Some vanish not because they were hidden, but because no one thought they needed to be remembered. So what were they? A tool, a symbol, a cipher, a key to forgotten knowledge, or just a riddle with no answer? The truth may still lie buried, waiting to be unearthed, or it may already sit behind museum glass, quiet and complete, its meaning dissolved, not by time, but by silence. The Roman dodecahedrons remind us that even in the most well-documented of civilizations, some objects escape definition, resisting categorization, quietly guarding their purpose. But some artifacts challenge more than just our understanding of use. They confront our very sense of time and place. They raise the possibility not only of forgotten knowledge, but of knowledge acquired too soon. One such artifact lies not in stone, but on parchment, a map, faded, fragmented, and still deeply unsettling. It is a single piece of gazelle skin parchment, measuring just over 2 feet across, its edges frayed, its colors faded with time. Inked in a meticulous hand, its sweeping coastlines curve in dark green, red, and black, while elegant Ottoman script flows along the margins like whispered commentary. Decorative ships float upon stylized seas. Strange animals, some real, some imagined, roam the margins. And in the center, the coastlines of continents that should not be known. This is the Piri Reis Map, created in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis. At first glance, it appears to be a typical early 16th century Portolan chart, beautiful, artistic, and speculative. But a closer look reveals its strangeness. The map depicts the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and what appears to be the northern coast of Antarctica, centuries before the continent was officially discovered. But how? Piri Reis himself tells us part of the story. In notes inscribed directly onto the map, he claims to have based it not on his own voyages, but on older source maps, some of them dating back to Alexander the Great. He references 20 charts and mappae mundi, some from Arab geographers, some possibly from the lost libraries of antiquity. And among them, he claims, were maps drawn by Columbus himself, suggesting that secret knowledge guided the Genoese explorer across the Atlantic. And yet, the Piri Reis map shows parts of the world Columbus never saw. It illustrates a detailed eastern coast of South America, extending far below the known limits of exploration at the time. It also includes geographical details that suggest a landmass where Antarctica lies, not covered in ice, but depicted with mountains, rivers, and a discernible coastline. Modern Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, over 3 centuries later. And more curiously still, the coastline shown on the Piri Reis map does not resemble the ice-covered continent known today, but instead mirrors the subglacial landmass revealed by modern seismic and radar imaging. Could this be a coincidence? A distortion of South America's shape, as some scholars suggest? Or was Piri Reis indeed copying from a far older source, one that recorded Antarctica before it froze? The mainstream view holds firm. The southern part of the map is simply inaccurate, a misinterpretation by Piri Reis of earlier charts distorted by limited knowledge. The strange southern coastline, some argue, could be a mirrored continuation of South America, or a mythical addition, common in early cartography, where the unknown was often filled with guesswork and imagination. But others are not so sure. In 1960, U.S. Air Force captain and cartographer Charles Hapgood proposed a radical theory. In his book, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, he suggested that the Piri Reis map and others like it, were based on ancient, highly advanced source maps, possibly made by a lost civilization with seafaring and surveying capabilities far ahead of their time. According to Hapgood, the map shows Antarctica's coastline as it would appear without ice, a condition that, based on geological evidence, may not have existed for over 6,000 years. This would imply the map's source materials predate known civilizations capable of such exploration. Hapgood's work caught the attention of none other than Albert Einstein, who wrote a foreword expressing cautious intrigue about the implications. And yet, no original map older than the Renaissance has been found to support this theory. No physical evidence of an ancient, globe-spanning culture with advanced cartography has surfaced. Could the map simply reflect an extraordinary cartographic tradition, now lost? Could ancient mariners, perhaps Phoenician, Carthaginian, or even Egyptian, have charted more of the world than we give them credit for? And if so, where are the records, the logs, the instruments? Or was it merely a Renaissance curiosity, assembled from inconsistent sources, creatively interpreted, and now read too literally by modern eyes? Adding to the intrigue is the map's partial survival. The Piri Reis Map we know today is only a fragment, just the western third of the original world map. The remaining sections are lost. Were they destroyed, hidden, or perhaps still waiting in some forgotten archive? And why was the map itself almost unknown for centuries? It was rediscovered in 1929, tucked away in the library of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, a fluke of history. Had it been discarded or gone unnoticed a little longer, it might have disappeared forever. The timing of its rediscovery, just as archaeology, aerial mapping, and geological science were rapidly advancing, only added to the mystery. The more we learned, the more curious the map became. Was Piri Reis simply compiling legends, or preserving the faint echo of a knowledge older than we can imagine? Today, scholars continue to debate its meaning. Some dismiss the anomalies as overinterpretation. Others see them as evidence of a hidden chapter in human history. But no one can explain everything, not conclusively. The Piri Reis Map remains, quite literally, a map to nowhere. A glimpse of a world we do not remember, an artifact drawn from sources we cannot trace. What coastlines did Piri Reis truly copy? What libraries did his sources once belong to? And what did humanity once know, long before the age of discovery began? Perhaps the answers lie not in the map itself, but in what was left out. The Piri Reis Map hints at the unsettling possibility of ancient knowledge preserved in fragments, coastlines charted before their time, continents recorded long before they were named. But what happens when the artifact itself seems to defy not just geography, but time altogether? In the deserts of Peru, far from the sea, lie hundreds of stones, carved with images that should not exist, images that continue to challenge the boundaries of archaeology, history, and belief. Scattered across dusty shelves in the back rooms of small museums and private homes in the city of Ica, Peru, is a collection of smooth, rounded river stones. Most are no larger than a human skull. Their surfaces are dark gray or black, polished by centuries of erosion, their weight cool and solid in the hand. But it is what's carved into them that has stirred controversy for decades. Anomalous engravings that depict scenes from a world we've never known, and perhaps were never meant to. The Ica Stones, as they are now known, came to global attention in the 1960s when a local Peruvian physician named Dr. Javier Cabrera began collecting them in large numbers. Over the years, his collection grew to more than 11,000 stones, forming the basis of what he called a library, a visual record, he claimed, of a long-lost civilization. What makes these stones so controversial is not just their quantity, but their content. Etched with precise and often intricate lines, the Ica Stones depict an extraordinary range of scenes: men coexisting with dinosaurs, taming or hunting them; complex surgical procedures, including open-heart transplants and brain surgeries; astronomical maps and what appear to be telescopic observations of planets; people using flying machines, advanced tools, and mysterious devices. The images are undeniably provocative. If authentic, they suggest a prehistoric civilization with a level of technology and understanding rivaling or surpassing our own. But if not, if they are forgeries, then the story behind their creation becomes just as puzzling. Who made them, and why? Mainstream archaeology has largely rejected the Ica Stones as modern hoaxes. Many of the stones were supplied by local farmers, particularly a man named Basilio Uchuya, who later confessed to carving them himself and selling them to collectors. He even demonstrated his methods, using a dental drill and reproducing similar designs. But the confession raised its own questions. Why would a farmer from a rural town produce thousands of stones, some with carvings so detailed and obscure that they defy local knowledge? Why would others join in, reproducing such a large volume of images with such stylistic consistency? And why, if they were fabricating scenes for profit, include images that are so bizarre, esoteric, and out of step with popular trends? Some defenders of the stones argue that not all were forged. A few pieces, they claim, were discovered in legitimate archaeological contexts, buried in tombs, or eroded from ancient strata. Others point to the presence of oxidation in the grooves of some stones, suggesting that at least a portion may be genuinely old, their engravings weathered by time. But age is not the only mystery. The themes depicted on the stones have no known parallel in pre-Columbian art. Peru, with its rich Inca and pre-Inca history, has left behind murals, pottery, and textiles, none of which contain imagery of dinosaurs, advanced medicine, or aircraft. If the stones are authentic, they represent a culture entirely unknown to mainstream history. And if they're not, why does the illusion feel so persistent? There are deeper, more speculative theories. Some suggest the Ica Stones are remnants of Atlantean knowledge, artifacts from a civilization lost not just to history, but to memory itself. Others believe they were created by survivors of an ancient catastrophe, recording what they could in stone before their world was swallowed by time. A few voices propose extraterrestrial influence, claiming the imagery represents not our past, but encounters with beings beyond Earth. Still others suggest that the stones are a psychological mirror, that the imagery, real or not, reflects something within us, a yearning for a different history, one in which knowledge was ancient, and the boundaries of science and spirit were not yet divided. But at the heart of the debate is a simple problem. There is no clear origin, no workshop, no documented discovery site, no written account that predates Cabrera's collection. The Ica Stones arrived, not in excavation logs or scholarly reports, but through back doors, word of mouth, and desert rumors. And so, they remain suspended between categories, too strange to be accepted, too persistent to be forgotten. Even if the majority are hoaxes, what of the few that seem weathered, aged, or unearthed in plausible contexts? What about the scattered reports of similar stones found decades earlier, before the boom in tourism and collector interest? Could there have been a seed of truth, long buried, and then embellished by modern hands? And if so, what was that seed? The Ica Stones ask more questions than they answer. They challenge the linear view of history, the idea that civilization began at a fixed point and advanced steadily forward. They invite us to consider the possibility that knowledge, like memory, may come and go, surfacing in unlikely places, only to disappear again. Were the Ica Stones ever meant to be found? Are they the last echoes of a forgotten science, or the first whispers of a fiction too elaborate to untangle? And in a world where forgeries and truths can be carved by the same hand, how do we tell the difference? The desert keeps its secrets, and the stones are silent. In the dry stillness of the Peruvian desert, the Ica Stones whisper stories that might never be confirmed, records of impossible visions carved in stone. But sometimes, an artifact doesn't just defy the past, it confronts faith itself. It becomes a question not only of history, but of identity, belief, and the thin line between miracle and mystery. Folded in linen and time, there exists such an object, a relic unlike any other, the Shroud of Turin. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, lies a linen cloth, 14 feet long and just over 3 feet wide. Faint and sepia-toned, it bears the image of a man, arms crossed, body elongated, eyes closed in death. The markings are subtle at first, barely visible in ordinary light, but under photographic negative, a face emerges in haunting clarity, a bearded man with wounds on his hands, feet, and side. Bloodstains trace the crown of the head, the scourged back, the pierced wrists. This is the Shroud of Turin, arguably the most studied, contested, and venerated relic in Christian history. To some, it is the burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth, a sacred imprint left by divine resurrection. To others, it is an exquisite medieval forgery designed to inspire awe, devotion, and pilgrimage. But to all, it is a mystery. The shroud first appears definitively in the historical record in 1354 in the small French village of Lire. A local knight claimed to possess the burial cloth of Christ. The church at the time was skeptical. Bishops questioned its authenticity, even calling it a clever sleight of hand. Yet the object drew thousands. Miracles were attributed to it. And over the centuries, it passed from one noble family to another, eventually entrusted to the House of Savoy, and then to Turin, where it resides today. But if the shroud is a medieval creation, why does it resist full explanation? In 1898, amateur photographer Secondo Pia took the first photographs of the cloth. What appeared in his negatives shocked the world, not a faint, ghostly imprint, but a detailed, almost lifelike image, one that was more anatomically accurate and emotionally evocative than anything previously visible to the naked eye. The negative image made headlines. Suddenly, the debate intensified. Was this the first photograph in history, created not by camera, but by something unknown? Over the next century, scientists, historians, and skeptics examined the shroud using increasingly sophisticated tools. They analyzed the weave of the linen, the bloodstains, the chemical composition of the fibers. In 1988, a series of radiocarbon dating tests were conducted independently by 3 laboratories. The results were consistent. The cloth dated to between 1260 and 1390 CE. The conclusion seemed inescapable. The shroud was medieval. But the controversy did not end there. Critics of the dating pointed to several flaws. The samples tested were taken from a corner of the shroud, an area possibly repaired after a fire in 1532. Some argued that contamination from centuries of handling, exposure to smoke, or microbial growth could have skewed the results. Then there is the matter of the image itself. No pigment, no brushstrokes, no known dye. Under microscopic analysis, the image rests only on the topmost fibers of the cloth, less than 1/5 the diameter of a human hair. It has no directionality, as one would expect from painting or rubbing. And unlike traditional art, it lacks distortion over the contours of a body. How, then, was it formed? Theories have ranged from the natural to the extraordinary. Some suggest it was caused by a chemical reaction, a burst of heat and ammonia from a decaying body interacting with the cloth's organic fibers. Others have hypothesized a form of photochemical exposure, perhaps involving unknown compounds or radiation. More fringe interpretations speak of a burst of energy at the moment of resurrection, an event so unique that it left a literal shadow in cloth. Still others entertain more elaborate ideas. Could the shroud have been created using early photographic techniques, centuries before photography was officially invented? Some propose the use of a camera obscura, a darkened room, a lens, and light-sensitive materials. Could a genius artisan, lost to time, have pioneered this process in secret? If so, what was their intent? To inspire faith? To deceive? Or to encode a message we still haven't deciphered? And then there are deeper questions. Not just how the image was made, but why it continues to matter. The man depicted on the shroud is wounded in ways that align with crucifixion narratives, nails through the wrists, not the palms, as traditionally depicted in medieval art, marks from scourging, a wound in the side. These details are historically and anatomically accurate. But how would a 14th century artist have known these nuances, many of which only became widely understood through modern archaeology and forensic science? Even more curiously, pollen grains found on the shroud suggest that it may have traveled through the Middle East, including regions of modern-day Israel and Turkey. Some researchers claim the fabric's weave matches those used in 1st century Palestine. Others argue that these findings are inconclusive, or the result of later contamination. And yet, the questions persist. If it is a fake, why is it so unlike anything else from its time? Why go to such intricate lengths to create an image that would not even be visible until the invention of photography centuries later? If it is real, how did it survive, and why was its existence not recorded earlier? What is the origin of this image, not just physically, but symbolically? Is the Shroud of Turin a relic of the divine, a work of genius, or a beautifully constructed enigma meant to test the boundaries of our belief? We may never know. But in its silence, in its contradictions, the shroud continues to speak, across centuries, cultures, and convictions. It invites not only scientific inquiry, but personal reflection. It asks us to consider what we believe and why. Is it a forgery? A miracle? A mystery waiting for the right light to reveal its truth? Perhaps the answer is not in the cloth itself, but in the space between faith and fact. The Shroud of Turin continues to perplex, an image suspended between science and faith, defying time and explanation. But not all mysterious objects are sacred. Some are forged not in linen and legend, but in stone and silence. Deep beneath the earth, in layers older than humanity itself, lie artifacts that should not exist. Spheres, shaped with uncanny precision, resting in ancient rock as if placed with intent. And yet, they were never meant to be found. These are the Klerksdorp Spheres. In the gold-rich region of South Africa's northwest province, just outside the mining town of Klerksdorp, the Earth tells a story far older than civilization. Here, miners and geologists have unearthed strange objects embedded in pyrophyllite rock, a soft sedimentary formation dated to be roughly 3 billion years old. These objects are small, most no more than 1 to 3 inches in diameter. But their simplicity is deceptive. Perfectly spherical or slightly flattened, they are carved or formed, with grooves circling their equators, like latitudinal lines on a globe. Some are nearly symmetrical. Others contain a seam-like indentation that suggests division into halves. They are dark, metallic in color, and incredibly smooth to the touch. To miners and locals, they became curiosities. To a few observers, they became something more. objects that should not, could not, exist in the strata where they were found. These are the Klerksdorp Spheres, and they've quietly challenged assumptions about human history, natural formation, and the boundaries of possibility. Mainstream scientists classify them as concretions, naturally occurring geological formations created by mineral precipitation around a nucleus. Over immense spans of time, sedimentary materials solidify into compact, often spherical shapes, influenced by the chemistry and pressure of their environment. It's a well-documented process. Concretions can be found all over the world. Some are spherical, some are oval or disc-like. In many cases, they appear in bizarre, even seemingly artificial forms, testament to the strange creativity of geology. But the Klerksdorp Spheres feel different. Their grooves are unusually well-defined. Their surfaces are unusually smooth. Some appear more machined than formed, raising questions that go beyond the geological into the philosophical. How does nature create such symmetry, such order, in the deep silence of ancient Earth? And why are some of these objects so distinctly unlike their neighbors? Even more strangely, a few spheres rotate. One, reportedly housed in the Klerksdorp Museum, is said to turn slightly on its axis, enclosed in a sealed display case with no external force acting upon it. Skeptics call this anecdotal, attributing the motion to vibration or imbalance. Others remain intrigued, seeing it as yet another unexplained quirk in an already enigmatic phenomenon. The mystery deepens when we consider the age of the rock where the spheres were found. 3 billion years ago, there were no humans, no tools, no metalwork, no civilizations capable of shaping objects with precision. Life itself, as far as we understand, was limited to primitive microbial organisms. And yet, these spheres appear, at least to the casual observer, to bear the marks of intention. How can we reconcile this? For many geologists, the answer is simple. The spheres are not artifacts. They are mineralogical curiosities, remarkable, yes, but entirely natural. Their symmetry, they argue, is the result of slow crystallization processes influenced by the surrounding environment. Their grooves could be explained by differential layering, pressure-induced fracturing, or erosion over time. But others remain unconvinced. Could these spheres be the fossilized remnants of some unknown biological or chemical process, long extinct? Could they have formed under conditions no longer found on Earth, a byproduct of ancient planetary chemistry lost to time? Or could they be something more radical, evidence of intelligence not from our species, or even from this epoch? Some fringe theorists suggest that the Klerksdorp Spheres are the legacy of a pre-human civilization, long erased by tectonic shifts and mass extinctions. Others go further still, proposing an extraterrestrial origin, likening the spheres to data capsules or navigational tools, implanted, perhaps, and forgotten. Of course, there is no evidence to support such claims, no inscriptions, no technology, no traces of machinery or purpose beyond shape alone. And yet, the idea persists. The mystery of the spheres is less about what they prove and more about what they suggest, that the past is not always as we imagine it. Why do these objects provoke such fascination? Perhaps because they seem to exist in a space between the natural and the artificial. Too perfect to dismiss, too simple to explain. They are not grand monuments or elaborate machines. They are small, unassuming, yet deeply unsettling, precisely because they should be mundane, but aren't. The Klerksdorp Spheres remind us that time is not a straight line, and that even in the oldest layers of Earth's crust, we may still encounter the inexplicable. They are stones, yes, but stones with a presence, with symmetry that provokes, with silence that speaks. What else lies buried beneath our feet, undisturbed, unclassified, unimagined? And if these are the fragments that survived, What might we have already passed over, mistaking mystery for mineral? The Earth holds secrets deeper than memory, and sometimes it presses them into spheres. The Klerksdorp Spheres, nestled in rock older than life itself, raise questions about the hidden potential of time, about what the Earth may remember long after we forget. But some artifacts don't come from deep geological epochs. They come from human hands, sharpened by fire and forged with a knowledge that seems centuries ahead of its time. From the cold, warrior-strewn soils of northern Europe, a different kind of enigma has been unearthed, an object of war, yet also of wonder. The Ulfberht Swords. In the dim light of a museum display, or unearthed from the long-forgotten grave of a Viking warrior, a particular type of sword has surfaced again and again. Simple in shape, deadly in purpose, but bearing a name that pulses with mystery, etched in clear, deliberate script along the blade, plus ULFBERHT+. The letters are unmistakable. Latin characters, arranged with care, flanked by crosses, often rendered with a kind of stark elegance, and they have been found on swords across Europe, dozens of them, dating from roughly 800 to 1000 CE, discovered in burial sites from Scandinavia to the Rhineland. But what makes the Ulfberht swords remarkable isn't just the name or the reach of their distribution, it's the steel. At a time when most European swords were made from brittle, impure iron, vulnerable to bending or shattering in battle, the Ulfberht blades stood apart. Metallurgical analysis reveals something astonishing. High-carbon crucible steel, produced at a quality level that wouldn't appear again in Europe for nearly 800 years. This type of steel, uniform in structure, low in impurities, and capable of holding a razor edge, was closer in composition to the famed Damascus steel, or even modern industrial steel. It required extraordinary heat, control, and technique. Techniques that, as far as we know, should not have been available in Europe during the early Middle Ages. So, where did it come from? The Ulfberht swords are often attributed to Frankish origin, likely produced in or around what is now Germany. The name Ulfberht may refer to a family, a master swordsmith, or even a monastic forge. Some scholars believe it was a trademark of sorts, a signature of quality in a time when brand and blade could mean life or death. But here, the mystery deepens. Not all Ulfberht swords are the same. Some are made with true high-quality steel. Others are crude imitations, bearing the same inscription, but made from far lesser materials. Misspellings, like Sulfberhtplatsti or Sulfberti+, suggest that the name itself became so valuable it was forged as often as the blades were. Was Ulfberht a person, a lineage, a guild? And more intriguingly, how did the true Ulfberht swordsmiths acquire the knowledge and materials to produce such steel? In the known world of the early Middle Ages, only one region was reliably producing crucible steel: Central Asia, particularly in areas that are now part of Iran, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Their technology, likely inherited and refined from earlier Indian steelmaking techniques, known as Wootz steel, was far ahead of European capabilities. This leads to one possibility. The steel used in true Ulfberht swords was imported, brought along ancient trade routes like the Silk Road, or passed westward through Viking trade networks, which stretched surprisingly far. The Vikings, though raiders, were also traders, venturing deep into the rivers of Russia, reaching the Black Sea, and making contact with the Islamic world. Could it be that this elite steel was sourced from the East, then forged into weapons in Frankish workshops? If so, that raises further questions. Why are these swords so rare? Fewer than 200 have ever been discovered. Why are they clustered around elite burials and often associated with high-status individuals? And how did knowledge of their creation disappear, only to resurface centuries later with the Industrial Revolution? Or could there have been something more secretive at play? Some speculate that the Ulfberht blades were the product of lost metallurgical knowledge, inherited from Roman or even pre-Roman smithing traditions, and preserved in isolation, perhaps by monastic orders or specialized smithing guilds. In a time when literacy and craft were often guarded closely, could these sword makers have kept their techniques hidden, passing them down only to trusted apprentices? More speculative theories suggest that the swords were ritual objects, imbued with sacred or even mystical significance. The symmetrical crosses bracketing the name, plus ULFBERHT+, have led some to propose that the swords were seen not just as tools of war, but spiritual weapons, forged in the name of God or under divine inspiration. Were they believed to carry protective power? Were they offerings, symbols of legitimacy, power, or purity in a world where the sword was not only a weapon, but a sacred bond? And what of the imitations? Their existence suggests that demand outpaced supply, that the Ulfberht name had, in its time, become synonymous with excellence, so much so that lesser smiths tried to replicate the prestige, even if they could not match the quality. But today, we are left with little more than fragments. The real Ulfberht, if he or they ever existed, left no written records, no manuals, no surviving workshops, just steel, rusted with age, and a name carved into metal. A name that traveled far beyond what should have been possible for the time. Was Ulfberht a lone genius? A forge lost to time? A hint of a global knowledge network far older than we've acknowledged? Or were these swords simply rare miracles of circumstance, perfect storms of material, method, and mystery? The Ulfberht swords remain as cold and silent as the graves they've been pulled from, but in their strange perfection, they challenge our assumptions about what was possible, about what was known, and about how much of history, like steel in fire, has been shaped, hardened, and then forgotten. The Ulfberht swords remind us that even the tools of war can carry the quiet mark of forgotten knowledge, etched in steel, forged beyond their time. But not all relics are weapons. Some speak to a deeper, more celestial understanding, one not born of conquest, but of contemplation. Beneath the forests of central Germany, buried in darkness for over 3 millennia, an ancient object was unearthed, one that suggests a relationship with the stars long before the written word. It is known simply as the Nebra Sky Disk. It is a circle of metal, no larger than a dinner plate, rough, oxidized bronze, marked by the slow corrosion of centuries. Yet, embedded in its surface, still gleaming faintly, are shapes of gold, delicate, deliberate, and precise. A crescent moon, a round golden sun, or perhaps full moon, scattered dots like a spray of stars, an arc curving along one edge, another along the other. Together, they form a composition as simple as it is strange, an ancient image of the night sky, captured in metal. This is the Nebra Sky Disk, discovered in 1999 by 2 illegal treasure hunters near the village of Nebra, in Saxony-Anhalt, Germany. Buried beneath the forest floor alongside bronze swords, axes, and bracelets, it was initially dismissed as too fantastical to be real. And yet, as scientists and archaeologists studied it, a consensus began to emerge. The disk was authentic, and it was old. Radiocarbon dating of the surrounding artifacts, along with soil analysis, places the Nebra Sky Disk at roughly 1600 BCE, over 3,600 years ago. That places it squarely in the European Bronze Age, a time before written language in the region, before cities, before centralized kingdoms. And yet, the disk suggests something far more advanced. The gold symbols are not random. The cluster of dots near the center appears to represent the Pleiades, a star cluster known and revered in ancient cultures across the globe. from the Maya to the Greeks to the Japanese. The arcs along the sides correspond with remarkable accuracy to the angle of the sunrise and sunset during the solstices at the latitude of Nebra. The disc, in short, may have functioned as a cosmological instrument, a way to track the movements of the heavens, to understand the passage of time, to mark the sacred rhythms of the earth and sky. But how? How could a culture with no written language, no known scientific institutions, and only rudimentary tools have created such an object? The craftsmanship is notable. The gold was likely sourced from the Carpathian Mountains, while the bronze used in the disc shows signs of sophisticated alloying, copper mixed with a precise proportion of tin. The artisans who made the disc understood metallurgy, celestial cycles, and geometry. But their names, their language, their society, all are lost. The Nebra Sky Disk was not found in a palace or a temple. It was buried on a hilltop, Mount Mittelberg, a place thought to be sacred. Some scholars believe it was a ritual deposit, an offering to the gods. Others think it may have been deliberately hidden, perhaps during a time of cultural upheaval when knowledge was at risk of being lost. And then there is the mystery of its uniqueness. Why have no other objects like it been found? Why this one disc, in this one place, with no clear precedents or successors in the archaeological record? Was it part of a larger system now vanished? Was it the work of an individual genius, or a cultural tradition we've yet to uncover? Some theorists have speculated that the disc was a portative device, a tool for priests or astronomers, used to align sacred architecture or perform seasonal rituals. Others argue it was a symbolic object, a representation of cosmological power more than a functional chart. A few even suggest that the disc encodes forgotten mathematical knowledge, preserved visually in a way that transcended language. More speculative voices have linked the disc to lost civilizations, to pre-Druidic priesthoods, or even to ancient visitors from distant lands, traders or travelers who carried astronomical wisdom across continents long before classical antiquity. These ideas remain unproven, but they reflect the profound strangeness of the disc. It feels disconnected, out of place, like a message left behind in a bottle, written in a language we have not yet learned to read. What is perhaps most striking is how the disc bridges worlds. It is both art and science, both sacred and empirical, both grounded in the earth and reaching toward the stars. And it hints at something easily forgotten, that long before cities and empires, before libraries and laboratories, humans were watching the sky and building meaning from its patterns. That even in prehistoric Europe, beneath the canopy of dark forests and starlit nights, people understood the sky not just as backdrop, but as blueprint. Today, the Nebra Sky Disk is housed in the State Museum of Prehistory in Halle. Its image has become iconic, a symbol of ancient Germanic heritage, a testament to Bronze Age intelligence. But it remains fundamentally mysterious. Was it a calendar, a teaching tool, a sacred object? Was it part of a broader cosmology that has since disappeared beneath the soil? And if one disk could survive for over 3,000 years, how many more remain buried, waiting in silence, just beneath our feet? The Nebra Sky Disk invites not only admiration, but humility. It reminds us that the line between myth and science is not always where we expect it to be, that the past is not a flat plain behind us, but a deep sky of its own, full of constellations we have yet to name. And perhaps, like the stars themselves, the meaning is there, if we only know how to look. The Nebra Sky Disk cast its golden stars across the Bronze Age sky, a cosmic relic that reminded us of the silent wisdom embedded in ancient hands. But some relics do not whisper of the stars. Some gaze inward, into the realms of fear, ambition, and divine transgression. Deep within the vaulted silence of old libraries, one such relic waits, vast, heavy, and bound in mystery. A book so massive it earned its name from sheer scale, and something darker. The Codex Gigas. It rests in the dim stillness of the National Library of Sweden, locked behind glass, its leather cover faded, its iron clasps tarnished with age. It is nearly 3 feet tall and weighs over 165 pounds. One man cannot lift it alone. Its pages, parchment made from the skins of over 100 animals, are thick, smooth, and quiet beneath a gloved hand. In the candlelit corridors of medieval Europe, such a book would have seemed impossible. A monument, not to stone or empire, but to ink, silence, and something unspoken. This is the Codex Gigas, Latin for giant book, but it is more famously known by another name, the Devil's Bible. The manuscript was created in the early 13th century, likely in the Benedictine monastery of Podlajic, in what is now the Czech Republic. It contains the full Latin Bible, as well as a compendium of medical texts, historical chronicles, calendars, and exorcism rituals. A complete universe of knowledge stitched into a single codex. But its fame and its mystery come from a single page. Folio 290 recto, a full-page illustration of the devil. Unlike anything else in medieval religious manuscripts, the image is bold and singular. A horned figure crouching between two towers, claws extended, eyes wide and blank. He is alone, framed in darkness. No other illustration in the book approaches this in scale or tone, and directly across from it, a depiction of the heavenly city, vibrant and ordered. Why would a monk, sworn to silence, humility, and devotion, place such a jarring image in the center of his sacred work? The legend, of course, begins with sin. According to a centuries-old tale, the Codex Gigas was created by a monk condemned to death. His crime is lost to history. Seeking redemption, he begged to be spared if he could produce a book that contained all human knowledge in a single night. The abbot agreed. As midnight deepened and the task proved impossible, the monk is said to have made a desperate pact, not with God, but with the devil. In exchange for his soul, the demon completed the manuscript, and the monk, in tribute, painted his new patron into the book's pages. It is a story passed down through generations, whispered rather than recorded. There is no proof, but the legend clings to the book like a shadow. From a historical perspective, the Codex is no less remarkable. Scholars estimate that writing the manuscript would have taken at least 20 years, possibly longer. And yet, handwriting analysis suggests that the entire book was written by a single scribe using the same ink in an unchanging hand without noticeable fatigue or error. Who was this person? How could one scribe maintain such consistency across over 300 parchment pages, many covered in dense columns of Latin script? And why the devil? Some propose that the inclusion of the demonic figure was not an act of worship, but of warning, a visual anchor in a world where images carried spiritual weight. Others believe it was symbolic, representing the constant struggle between darkness and light, ignorance and knowledge. A reminder that in the pursuit of total understanding, one must confront all sides of existence, even the terrifying. But the Codex Gigas carries other mysteries. Over the centuries, the book moved through empires. It was kept in monastic libraries, stolen during wars, passed into royal collections. In the 30 Years' War, Swedish forces looted it from Prague, bringing it north where it has remained ever since. Some pages are missing, not torn hastily, but removed with precision. Was it to protect secrets, to erase dangerous knowledge, or simply damage over time? We cannot know. The missing folios, most notably between the Old Testament and New Testament, have fueled speculation. Some believe they once contained forbidden texts, heretical interpretations, or hidden rituals. And then there's the matter of its construction. The book's sheer size is perplexing. No other manuscript from its era approaches its scale. Was it ever meant to be read, or was it ceremonial, designed as a showpiece or spiritual object? Its contents, a blend of sacred and secular, suggest an ambition not just to preserve scripture, but to compile all that was known, to create a total worldview within covers of leather and iron. Could the Codex Gigas have been more than a book? Was it an attempt to encode a philosophy, a belief system, or a warning? Was the devil's inclusion meant to signify temptation or authorship? No one knows what motivated the creator. No diary was left behind, no marginal notes, just the unchanging hand, the sprawling knowledge, and the devil's gaze, fixed, frozen, unblinking across centuries. Today, the Codex Gigas is preserved under controlled conditions. Few turn its pages. Fewer still are allowed to study it up close. But the questions it raises endure. What would drive someone to dedicate decades to such a work? What truths were meant to be revealed or hidden within its pages? And if the story is only half legend, what is the other half? A pact? A punishment? A prayer? The book remains whole. The monk, long gone. But in the darkness between words, something still watches. And perhaps, like the stars traced on the Nebra Sky Disk, its meaning is not in what is seen, but in what is understood. If we dare to look close enough, it rests in the dim stillness of the National Library of Sweden, locked behind glass, its leather cover faded, its iron clasps tarnished with age. It is nearly 3 feet tall and weighs over 165 pounds. One man cannot lift it alone. Its pages, parchment made from the skins of over 100 animals, are thick, smooth, and quiet beneath a gloved hand. In the candlelit corridors of medieval Europe, such a book would have seemed impossible. A monument, not to stone or empire, but to ink, silence, and something unspoken. This is the Codex Gigas, Latin for giant book, but it is more famously known by another name, the Devil's Bible. The manuscript was created in the early 13th century, likely in the Benedictine monastery of Podlajic, in what is now the Czech Republic. It contains the full Latin Bible, as well as a compendium of medical texts, historical chronicles, calendars, and exorcism rituals. A complete universe of knowledge stitched into a single codex. But its fame and its mystery come from a single page. Folio 290 recto, a full-page illustration of the devil. Unlike anything else in medieval religious manuscripts, the image is bold and singular. A horned figure crouching between 2 towers, claws extended, eyes wide and blank. He is alone, framed in darkness. No other illustration in the book approaches this in scale or tone, and directly across from it, a depiction of the heavenly city, vibrant and ordered. Why would a monk, sworn to silence, humility, and devotion, place such a jarring image in the center of his sacred work? The legend, of course, begins with sin. According to a centuries-old tale, the Codex Gigas was created by a monk condemned to death. His crime is lost to history. Seeking redemption, he begged to be spared if he could produce a book that contained all human knowledge in a single night. The abbot agreed. As midnight deepened and the task proved impossible, the monk is said to have made a desperate pact, not with God, but with the devil. In exchange for his soul, the demon completed the manuscript, and the monk, in tribute, painted his new patron into the book's pages. It is a story passed down through generations, whispered rather than recorded. There is no proof, but the legend clings to the book like a shadow. From a historical perspective, the Codex is no less remarkable. Scholars estimate that writing the manuscript would have taken at least 20 years, possibly longer. And yet, handwriting analysis suggests that the entire book was written by a single scribe, using the same ink, in an unchanging hand, without noticeable fatigue or error. Who was this person? How could one scribe maintain such consistency across over 300 parchment pages, many covered in dense columns of Latin script? And why the devil? Was it an attempt to encode a philosophy, a belief system, or a warning? Was the devil's inclusion meant to signify temptation or authorship? No one knows what motivated the creator. No diary was left behind, no marginal notes, just the unchanging hand, the sprawling knowledge, and the devil's gaze, fixed, frozen, unblinking across centuries. Today, the Codex Gigas is preserved under controlled conditions. Few turn its pages. Fewer still are allowed to study it up close. But the questions it raises endure. What would drive someone to dedicate decades to such a work? What truths were meant to be revealed or hidden within its pages? And if the story is only half legend, what is the other half? A pact? A punishment? A prayer? The book remains whole, the monk long gone. But in the darkness between words, something still watches. And perhaps, like the stars traced on the Nebra Sky Disk, its meaning is not in what is seen, but in what is understood, if we dare to look close enough. The Codex Gigas looms like a relic from a forgotten pact, its pages thick with scripture and silence, its purpose still cloaked in uncertainty. But some mysteries are smaller, circular, fragile, and rather than contain vast libraries of knowledge, they offer only a single spiral, a message pressed into clay, undeciphered for over a century. It does not speak volumes, but whispers, softly, cryptically, found not in a monastery, but beneath the sunlit ruins of ancient Crete. This is the mystery of the Phaistos Disc. Beneath the olive trees and scattered ruins of southern Crete lies the site of Phaistos, once a thriving center of the Minoan civilization. Here, in 1908, an Italian archaeologist named Luigi Pernier unearthed something utterly unlike anything else from the Bronze Age Aegean. It was small, just 15 centimeters across, but instantly captivating. A circular disc of baked clay, delicately inscribed with symbols that no one had ever seen before. On each side, the disc carries a spiral of impressions, 241 symbols in total, arranged in a continuous line that curls inward like a labyrinth. But these are not carved by hand. Each symbol appears to have been stamped, using individual dies, as if printed or pressed, a technique that suggests a kind of movable type printing system thousands of years before Gutenberg. The symbols themselves are strange and vivid. Human figures in ornate poses, fish, birds, flowers, shields, arrows, tools, abstract patterns. Some symbols repeat frequently, suggesting a language, or at least a pattern of speech, but the writing is like no other ever discovered, and still today it remains undeciphered. Dated to roughly 1700 BCE, the Phaistos Disc belongs to the same cultural world that gave us Linear A, another undeciphered script of Minoan origin. But the disc does not match Linear A, nor does it resemble Linear B, the later Mycenaean script used to record an early form of Greek, nor Egyptian, nor Sumerian, nor anything else from known Bronze Age writing systems. It is, quite literally, a language without a family. The disc was found alone, without duplicates, and without accompanying artifacts bearing the same script. No other object has ever been discovered using the same stamping technique. It stands as a singular artifact, an orphan of its era. What was its purpose? Some believe it is a religious text, a hymn, a chant, or a ritual incantation used by Minoan priests. Others suggest it is a calendar or a list of offerings. A few even propose it may be a game board or a teaching tool designed to train readers in a now-lost writing system. The spiral layout itself is symbolic. In Minoan art and architecture, the spiral appears often as a motif of cycles, of renewal, of sacred geometry. Could the shape of the writing reflect the nature of its content? A journey inward? A meditation? Or a trap for meaning, coiled in silence? Then there are the theories that stray further from the path. Some suggest the Phaistos Disc is not Minoan at all, that it may have arrived in Crete from elsewhere, perhaps from Anatolia, the Levant, or even farther. Could it be a trader's relic, a cultural import from a civilization now lost to history? Others, more speculative still, see in the disc a hint of an ancient code, not a language, but a cipher, a mathematical key. Some patterns seem almost algorithmic. Could it be that the disc was never meant to be read aloud, but solved? Its stamped production has drawn comparisons to early mechanical logic, a suggestion that makes some wonder. Was this the first attempt at replicable text, a precursor to printing? If so, what culture had that idea? And why did it not continue? But for all the mystery, the disc has critics too. Some have gone so far as to suggest that the disc is a forgery, planted by early archaeologists hoping to make a grand discovery. Yet scientific analysis of the clay and context have repeatedly supported its authenticity. The artifact, it seems, is real. The message, still elusive. There have been dozens of attempts to decode it. Linguists, cryptographers, historians, and amateurs alike have proposed translations ranging from poetry to political decrees. But no translation has gained consensus. The lack of any bilingual text, or even another sample, makes verification almost impossible. So, the disc waits. Today, it rests in the Heraklion Archaeological Museum, behind glass, drawing the eyes of visitors who may not realize they are staring at one of the great unsolved puzzles of the ancient world. There are no guards, no elaborate protections, just a small plaque, a spiral of symbols, and the silence of interpretation. What voice once spoke from these symbols? What culture created this tool, not just to write, but to press, to replicate, to compose? Was the disc sacred, scientific, decorative? Did it hold meaning for many, or was it the work of one? And why, after all this time, has no other example emerged? Is the Phaistos Disc a relic of a fleeting experiment, an early trial at something that failed to spread? Or is it the lone surviving whisper of a civilization whose thoughts, rituals, and words have otherwise faded completely? The clay is silent, the symbols endure, and somewhere within that spiral, meaning may still be waiting, quietly coiled in the heart of the disc, as if history itself left behind a riddle, not to be solved, but to be remembered. To remind us that even in the heart of civilization, some voices still lie unread. The Phaistos Disc coils its secrets in clay, an elegant spiral of forgotten signs pressed by hands that vanished long ago. But not all puzzles are prehistoric. Some are carved in crisp stone, hiding in plain sight. Their symbols are not ancient alphabets, but single letters, arranged so simply they almost seem accidental. Yet for centuries, they have resisted every effort to explain them. Deep in the heart of England, nestled within a tranquil garden, lies one such enigma. A message in stone, a mystery untouched by time. This is the Shugborough Inscription. At first glance, it appears almost ordinary. Set within the manicured grounds of Shugborough Hall in Staffordshire, England, the Shepherd's Monument is a decorative garden structure, an 18th century folly surrounded by hedges, fountains, and sculpted stone. It bears a marble relief, a mirror of Nicolas Poussin's painting, The Shepherds of Arcadia, in which 3 shepherds and a woman stand around a stone tomb, pointing to the faintly etched words, "Et in Arcadia ego," even in Arcadia I am. But just beneath the image, carved into the stone panel, is a line of seemingly nonsensical letters, 10 characters in all, D, O, U, O, S, V, A, V, V, M, 8 uppercase letters, interrupted only by 2 symmetrical O's. No punctuation, no context, just this line, in plain view, as if awaiting someone to notice. The Shugborough Inscription, as it's come to be known, has puzzled scholars, cryptographers, poets, and conspiracy theorists for more than 250 years. Its origin is officially unrecorded, its meaning entirely unknown. Who carved it? Why? And what were they trying to say? Theories abound. Some see it as a cipher, a coded message that can be decrypted using classical cryptographic methods. In the 19th and 20th centuries, codebreakers, including some who worked at Bletchley Park, where Nazi ciphers were broken during World War II, tried their hand at cracking the line. No consensus emerged. Others believe it is acrostic, the first letters of a longer Latin phrase, a poetic or philosophical statement meant to be pondered, not solved. One popular interpretation reads, Deo optimo uno, uxoris optimi, sit via amoris, viam veritatis memento. To God, the best and greatest, and to the best of wives, let this be the path of love. Remember the path of truth. It is elegant, it fits the letters, but it's also speculative, crafted to match the inscription, not discovered within it. Still others have sought meaning in religious symbolism. Some claim the inscription refers to Rosicrucianism, or secret Christian sects that operated in the shadows of the Enlightenment. Others have drawn connections to Freemasonry, which flourished among aristocratic circles at the time the monument was built. Could the inscription be a Masonic code, an initiation riddle or reference to hidden knowledge? Then there is the more dramatic theory. In the late 20th century, the Shugborough inscription became associated with the mystery of the Holy Grail, popularized by books like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and later the Da Vinci Code. According to this interpretation, the letters encode directions or clues to the location of a lost relic, perhaps even the bloodline of Christ. This theory draws heavily from the monument's use of Poussin's painting. The original canvas, housed in the Louvre, has long been linked, however tenuously, to Grail legends. Could the Shugborough relief be signaling something deeper? A hidden message passed through art, architecture, and allegory. Skeptics caution restraint. There is no solid evidence connecting the inscription to any such legends. And yet, the theory refuses to fade. And then, there is the mystery of its creator. The monument was commissioned sometime between 1748 and 1763 by Thomas Anson, a wealthy member of Parliament and brother to Admiral George Anson, one of Britain's great naval explorers. Thomas was a known intellectual and patron of the arts, deeply interested in antiquity, philosophy, and mysticism. He had traveled widely across Europe, possibly coming into contact with esoteric traditions and secret societies. Did Thomas Anson leave behind the inscription as a kind of intellectual challenge, a riddle for future minds to unravel? Or did it carry more personal meaning, a private message to someone long gone, now obscured by time? The inscription's symmetry, the way it centers around the O's, the repetition of V's, all suggest intentional design. Some have even argued it's a visual pun, the shape and layout echoing ideas, not just letters. Yet, no document, no diary, no letter ever surfaced to explain it. Just the 10 letters, 10 characters that sit beneath a scene of pastoral serenity, untouched by explanation, watched by stone shepherds who offer no answer. Why place a coded message in a garden? Perhaps that is part of the riddle. Shugborough Hall, like many estates of its time, was not merely a residence, but a landscape of ideas, its sculptures and grottos designed to evoke mythology, philosophy, and mortality. The Shepherd's Monument was a canvas of thought, a place where meaning was meant to be sought, not handed down. But even so, the inscription endures beyond its context. The garden has changed, the family is gone, the world around it has moved on, and yet DOUOSVAVVM remains, sharp, clear, and unread. Was it a name, a prayer, a map? Is it the key to a greater mystery? Or a puzzle whose solution was never meant to be found? In a world where almost everything is eventually explained, the Shugborough Inscription stands stubbornly intact, 10 letters resisting centuries of scrutiny. A message carved not in hope of clarity, but perhaps in celebration of the unknown. And so it waits, still, stone, silent, as if guarding something more than a secret, as if reminding us that some codes are not broken by logic, but by patience, by wonder, or not at all. The Shugborough Inscription offers a puzzle of precision, 10 letters etched in stone, resisting time and reason. But not all mysteries are carved for the eye alone. Some are meant to be read, to be spoken, even sung, though no one today can recall their voice. Thousands of miles from England's countryside, on a remote island surrounded by endless Pacific waters, another code endures. One written not in marble, but in wood, a language that flickers at the edge of understanding. This is the enigma of RongoRongo. Rapa Nui, a name whispered by waves across the Pacific Ocean. Known to the world as Easter Island, this remote speck of land, one of the most isolated inhabited islands on Earth, has long captivated the imagination. Towering Moai statues stand in silent procession along its cliffs and volcanic slopes, their stone faces turned inland, as if watching something that has already passed. But the Moai are not the island's only mystery. In scattered collections across the globe, from the Vatican Library to the Smithsonian, there exist 24 wooden tablets, elongated, weathered, and inscribed with rows of delicate glyphs. These symbols, both intricate and abstract, form a system unlike any other known writing in the Pacific. Some resemble human figures, others hint at animals, plants, celestial bodies, or tools. All of them curve and flow in rhythmic patterns across the surface, as if meant to be followed, traced, understood. The script is known as RongoRongo, a name given after its discovery, possibly derived from the Rapa Nui term Kohau RongoRongo, meaning lines of recitation. But what do the symbols say? And who first carved them? The history of RongoRongo begins in fragments. The earliest Western account comes from 1864, when a Catholic missionary, Eugène Hérode, visited the island and observed that the locals possessed tablets covered in mysterious signs. But by then, the knowledge of how to read them was already fading. According to oral tradition, only certain elders, priests, or wise men, known as Tangata RongoRongo, were allowed to read or chant the texts. The glyphs were not just words, but chants, recited aloud during rituals, passed down through generations. Yet colonization, disease, missionary influence, and the forced labor raids of the 19th century devastated the island's population and severed its cultural memory. By the time scholars began collecting the tablets, no one remained who could interpret them. The surviving texts vary in size and material, some carved into driftwood, others into more refined boards. Some contain hundreds of glyphs arranged in parallel lines. Most striking is the method of writing, the reverse Boustrophodon style, in which each line is read in alternating directions, left to right, then right to left, with the glyphs turned upside down on each line. This unique format suggests not only a developed system of notation, but a sophisticated understanding of how to preserve and guide narrative flow. but the meaning has never been recovered. Linguists have tried to decode RongoRongo using comparative methods, matching known Polynesian languages to the repeated patterns of the script. Glyphs do repeat. Structures appear. Some believe the texts may include genealogies, creation myths, or calendrical data, as similar content appears in other Polynesian oral traditions. One tablet seems to track the lunar calendar, hinting at a kind of ritual or agricultural almanac. Yet no bilingual key, no Rosetta Stone, has ever been found. No one knows what the glyphs sound like. No single glyph has been definitively translated. Some researchers believe RongoRongo was a true writing system, capable of recording complex language similar to hieroglyphs or cuneiform. Others argue it was proto-writing, symbolic rather than phonetic, used to encode ideas or ritual knowledge rather than spoken words. And some doubt its antiquity altogether. There are no confirmed references to RongoRongo before the 18th century. The oldest surviving tablets may not predate European contact. Was the script developed inspired by Western writing, as a local invention in response to European influence? Or was it a much older tradition, already in decline, preserved only on rare tablets and sacred memory? If RongoRongo predates European contact, it would represent one of the only known indigenous writing systems in Oceania. That alone would be remarkable, a sign of cognitive and cultural development isolated from other literate civilizations. But if it doesn't, if it was a symbolic system born from colonial disruption, then it becomes something else, a window into how a culture attempts to preserve its identity under pressure, reinventing its voice in unfamiliar shapes. There are more speculative theories, too. Some have suggested the tablets encode celestial knowledge, tracing the paths of stars, eclipses, or seasonal cycles. Others wonder if the glyphs contain mnemonic systems, designed to aid in the oral transmission of myth and law. More fringe ideas link the script to lost civilizations, or propose that the carving methods suggest contact with distant peoples across oceans. There is, of course, no proof for these claims, and yet the mystery persists. What we are left with are traces, symbols without sounds, stories without readers, songs without singers, wooden tablets, cracked and faded, holding words no one can speak. Why did RongoRongo disappear so completely? What memories were lost with the last reader? And how many more tablets may have been burned, buried, or broken, vanishing before anyone knew their worth? Each glyph feels alive, fluid, almost animate, like something caught mid-motion, mid-thought, as if they still carry echoes of their original purpose, if only we could hear them. RongoRongo is not just a script, it is a silence, carefully carved, and in its quiet, it asks a question we have yet to answer. How does a language die when it leaves no voice behind? And could it, one day, be heard again? Somewhere on Easter Island, the Moai still watch, and perhaps, deep within the wood of a forgotten tablet, so does a lost story, waiting for its name to be spoken once more. The glyphs of RongoRongo leave us with symbols like footprints in sand, shapes whose voices have faded, yet whose presence lingers. They remind us that some knowledge vanishes not with a roar, but with a whisper. And now we turn to another mystery, this time not carved into wood, but into pure crystal, translucent, weightless in appearance, yet heavy with implication. Scattered across continents, these objects should not exist in the way they do. Yet, there they are, gazing out from glass cases and private vaults. They are the crystal skulls. They shimmer like ghosts under museum lights, polished quartz, perfectly shaped, smooth to the touch, yet impossibly intricate in form. Eyes hollow and yet full. Faces stylized but unmistakably human. At first glance, They appear as sacred objects, ritualistic, reverent, but it's not their appearance alone that has fascinated the world for over a century. It's the question, who made them, and how? More than a dozen crystal skulls have surfaced over the years, attributed to Mesoamerican origins, linked to ancient cultures like the Aztec, the Maya, or even earlier, more elusive civilizations. The most famous among them, the so-called Mitchell-Hedges skull, has captivated researchers and mystics alike. Claimed to have been discovered in the 1920s in the ruins of Lubantun, a Mayan site in modern-day Belize, it was described as nearly anatomically perfect. Made of clear quartz crystal, it includes a detachable jaw and appears carved against the natural axis of the crystal, a feat that, even today, would be technically difficult without causing fracture. According to early accounts, it was found by Anna Mitchell-Hedges, adopted daughter of British adventurer F.A. Mitchell-Hedges, inside a collapsed altar. She would go on to describe strange phenomena surrounding the skull, visions, sensations, even inexplicable changes in temperature. Others who handled it reported similar effects. But these stories, like the object itself, are cloaked in uncertainty. Historians and archaeologists have long questioned the skull's origins. There is no documentation of its discovery in the excavation logs from Lubantun. In fact, records suggest the skull may have been purchased at auction in the 1940s. This casts doubt on the original narrative, raising the possibility that the legend was crafted after the fact. And the Mitchell-Hedges skull is not alone. Other crystal skulls reside in the British Museum, the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris, and in private collections around the world. Most are carved from either clear or milky quartz, ranging in size and detail. Some appear primitive, others astonishingly refined. Their stylistic similarities hint at a shared origin, yet no two are alike. When subjected to scientific analysis, many of the skulls show microscopic tool marks, consistent with rotary wheels or modern carving tools, such as those used in the 19th century. Traces of abrasives like silicon carbide, unknown in pre-Columbian times, have been detected. Based on this evidence, most experts agree that the crystal skulls are modern fabrications, created in the 1800s or later, possibly by European artisans influenced by a growing fascination with ancient Mesoamerica. And yet, the mystery endures. Despite questions about their authenticity, crystal skulls continue to provoke deep curiosity. Why? Perhaps because even the modern pieces challenge what we expect from artisanship. Quartz is a notoriously difficult material to work with, especially without cracking or warping. That several skulls exist at this level of precision, without obvious flaws, invites wonder. And then there are those few specimens, such as the Mitchell-Hedges skull, that defy easy categorization, with no clear signs of modern tool use and no definitive provenance to disprove the myth. Some propose that if not ancient, then the skulls were created from lost knowledge, techniques passed down in secret or rediscovered by obscure artisans whose skills exceeded their time. Others link the skulls to esoteric traditions, suggesting they were not meant to be merely art, but containers of energy, memory, or spiritual consciousness. According to certain indigenous legends, though often disputed or exaggerated by outsiders, there are said to be 13 original crystal skulls, each imbued with knowledge from the gods or from a forgotten civilization. These skulls, the story goes, will one day be reunited to reveal a powerful truth about humanity's origins or destiny. It is a compelling idea, but no verified ancient records, inscriptions, or archaeological sites have confirmed the legend. Still, the skulls continue to inspire speculation, linking them to Atlantis, to extraterrestrials, to ancient energy grids that once spanned the Earth. In the realm of popular media, they've become icons of mystery, featured in films, novels, and documentaries. The line between artifact and artifact as symbol has blurred. But perhaps that's the point. The crystal skulls are mirrors, reflecting what we bring to them. Science sees fabrication, history sees fraud, myth sees prophecy, and somewhere in between lies the possibility that our desire for mystery is itself a kind of evidence, not of the object's past, but of our own need for forgotten origins, for stories that run deeper than the written word. Could one or more of the skulls still be authentic, a remnant of an undocumented tradition? Could the quartz itself carry memories, as some metaphysical traditions believe, resonating not with data, but with intent? Or are the skulls merely elegant forgeries, crafted with skill, sold with story, and sustained by the human hunger for wonder? We may never know for certain, but they endure, as all the best mysteries do, not because of what they prove, but because of what they refuse to answer. Because in the smooth, cold curve of crystal, we find not just craftsmanship, but silence. The crystal skulls shimmer with uncertainty, silent, intricate echoes of a past that may never have existed, yet still refuse to fade. They stand as testaments to how mystery can be carved into form. But some enigmas are drawn instead, penned and painted in precise yet indecipherable strokes, not in stone or crystal, but on paper. And not from the ancient world, but from the modern one. It is a book that reads like a dream, if dreams had grammar. This is the Codex Seraphinianus. Bound in red leather and etched with strange gold embellishments, the Codex Seraphinianus appears, at first glance, to be an encyclopedia. Its pages are dense with labeled illustrations, ornate chapter breaks, and carefully organized sections. A table of contents, a recurring page layout, a system. But that system, upon closer inspection, dissolves. Nothing in the book is real. The illustrations depict surreal, often unsettling images: fish-shaped fruit growing from vines, people morphing into furniture, impossible machines constructed from bone and glass, unfamiliar alphabets annotated in perfect, flowing calligraphy. There are diagrams of imaginary animals, maps of non-existent continents, charts of unknown stars, and running through it all, line after line of carefully inked text, composed in a language that no one has ever translated, because it is not meant to be read, or perhaps, not yet. Created in the late 1970s by Italian artist and architect Luigi Serafini, the Codex Seraphinianus is often described as a modern Voynich manuscript, a book that mimics the structure of scientific knowledge while being entirely untethered from the world we know. Published first in 1981, the Codex has since acquired cult status among artists, linguists, and seekers of the strange. What makes the Codex so haunting is not merely its fantasy, it's the consistency of its illusion. The invented script, composed of looping, elegant characters, is so fluid that it feels decipherable. The illustrations are detailed, methodical, even pedagogical. They suggest taxonomy, history, logic, but nothing corresponds to anything known. The more you study it, the more it seems like a book from another world, a record of life as it might appear in a parallel dimension, similar in structure, yet alien in essence. Is it simply a work of surrealist art? A satire of encyclopedic knowledge? A meditation on the limits of language? Serafini himself has offered few clues. In rare interviews, he stated that the writing system is not a code, but an asemic script, meaning it has no direct semantic meaning. It is not a cipher. It is meant to evoke the feeling of reading, without actually conveying information. Just as children pretend to read long before they understand letters, the Codex invites us to engage with the sensation of comprehension, even when comprehension is impossible. Yet this explanation, calm, clear, almost too reasonable, has not quelled the speculation. Some believe the Codex is more than artistic play, that its language, though a semic on the surface, may encode underlying patterns or messages. The repetition of glyphs, the rhythm of the script, the structure of the chapters, these suggest a system too refined to be purely ornamental. Could it be that the Codex is an elaborate meditation on language itself, on the boundaries between symbol and meaning? Could it be that its true subject is not the world it portrays, but the act of perception, the way our minds struggle to organize, understand, and assign value? Others take a more metaphysical view. They suggest the Codex is a kind of channeled work, a document dictated not by rational design, but by the subconscious, a visual dream language emerging from the depths of the human psyche, uncensored by conventional thought. Some have compared it to the hallucinatory art of outsider artists, those who create detailed, obsessive works not for public display, but as expressions of inner vision. And still others, further at the fringe, propose that the Codex Seraphinianus may not be fiction at all, but memory, a recollection of something once real, now forgotten. Could the book represent echoes of alternate timelines, memories of another Earth, a transmission not forward or backward in time, but sideways? Of course, there is no evidence for such claims, and Serafini himself offers no such hints. But the book resists conclusion. It resists certainty. Even the title remains enigmatic. Seraphinianus evokes seraphim, the fiery winged beings of biblical lore, guardians of mysteries too profound for human understanding. Is the Codex their scripture, their bestiary, their joke? Today, copies of the Codex Seraphinianus reside in libraries, bookstores, and private collections around the world. Readers return to it not to find answers, but to experience the sensation of being on the edge of understanding, of nearly grasping something that slips away just before it becomes clear. And perhaps that's its power. The Codex doesn't just depict another world. It reminds us how much of our own world remains unread, how much we assume we know, and how often we build meaning from patterns that may be meaningless, or simply beyond our reach. What happens when language loses its moorings? When knowledge becomes indistinguishable from illusion? When the form of understanding survives, but the content is gone? The Codex Seraphinianus asks these questions quietly, not through declarations, but through diagrams, through pages that refuse to settle, through a script that looks almost right if only you could remember the rules. Perhaps it's not a book meant to be solved, but a reminder that some knowledge is meant to be felt, not defined, and that in the spaces where meaning fades,